Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you another. Why does my mic sound weird? Nope. Hello, hello, hello. I'm gonna turn the mic up. That's what I'm gonna do. Hello, hello. All right, it's as good as any. Anyway, yeah, Jesus Christ, what a terrible rhythm to start this on. So I'll start the way I start every episode. This podcast is sponsored by King Arthur Capital Group. Fund your fight camp, showing fighters how to leverage credit and capital so they can treat their career like a business. Like I say, and I mean this every time. This isn't like a pre-written thing. I very much mean this. I love sharing the information about King Arthur Capital Group with as many people out there in the combat sports world as possible. If those people link up with David King Arthur McElroy, they work with King Arthur Capital Group, and it makes life more comfortable for them and for their families as they pursue their dream as a professional fighter. That's amazing. That's great for the sport. So with that always being with people always having to go straight from their 12-hour shift that they work during the day straight to training for however long in the evening, and all the things that fighters do to make their life as a fighter and a person work. Hit up King Arthur Capital Group at Fund Your Fight Camp on Instagram. If you're looking to help fund your fight camp, you're looking to treat your career more like a business, hit up David McElroy and, see if you end up in a more comfortable position moving forward, one that works better for you and, set yourself up better for the present and for the future. That is Fund Your Fight Camp on Instagram. Also, check out Fight Club Crate, mystery fight gear, knockout prices, undisputed value, combat sports boxes delivered monthly. Use my promo code TAPTHAT15 to get 15% off of your first purchase with Fight Club Crate, and hit those folks up on Instagram at Fight Club Crate. Like I said, they are a very unique group. There's so many, monthly subscription boxes out there for every possible hobby, profession, interest, whatever you're into. Now, if you're a combat connoisseur, casual, hardcore, whatever the hell, now there's something out there for you. So check out all the cool new products that they're getting from these different cool small businesses with these very unique ideas and these cool designs, cool concepts on so many different products in the combat sports world. It's got something for everybody who's into combat sports in any way of their life. So hit them up at Fight Club Crate on Instagram, promo code TAPTHAT15. And, if there's a, combat connoisseur in your life that's got a birthday, Father's Day just happened, but, if you get 4th of July presents, I don't know how you roll. If you're one of those people that gets Christmas presents in the summer so that you don't have to think about it, Fight Club Crate. That's your answer. And finally, this podcast is brought to you by Substats. It's the analytics and intelligence platform for competitive grappling, giving promoters, leagues, commentators the data that they've never had, matchmaking tools, athlete profiles, event breakdowns, and match analysis powered by computer vision. If you compete, you promote, or you just love the sport, check them out at substats.app, on Instagram at Substats. If you're into competitive grappling, where Substats really specializes, they're expanding. Go listen to my interlude episode with Abraham Diaz of Substats. I don't think there's anything in the world that guy doesn't want to do with Substats. I think he pretty much said as much as that on the podcast. I'm pretty sure he said the goal was global domination. So, if you are if you're into competitive grappling, judo, no-gi, gi jiu-jitsu, Wrestling, Sambo. Abraham's doing it all now. Substats is building the analytics layer that the sport has been missing. Athlete profiles, event intelligence, and match breakdowns. Check them out at substats.app and use my promo code TAPTHAT for 10% off of your initial purchase with Substats. And I wanted to have this queued up just to...
Let's unpack.
Good blimey. Nerd alert! Next up in our tour of every single country.
I just wanted to play that clip for Substats. I think Abraham would agree with the sentiment. Find the thing in life that you're a nerd about, you know? Nerds, you think people are nerds. Nerds have it made. Amazing to know what in life you're passionate and obsessed about. I know, so I'm not denying any nerd allegations. So if you're not a nerd, I'd suggest that you find a hobby, find something that you dive into and get obsessed over, that people get concerned about for you because you're so deep into it. That's what nerd stuff is. So, this is another episode of the Tap That MMA podcast. We're looking forward to UFC Fight Night Baku this weekend. And so Baku is in Azerbaijan. I don't know if it's the capital. I kind of figure. What I love about Azerbaijan is that poppin' ass flag that they have. If every flag in the world was a candy, I think Azerbaijan would be a delicious flag. Russia's wouldn't be very tasty. I wouldn't know about whether I was going to eat the Brazilian flag, but like in America, that probably just tastes like hot dogs, like on Memorial Day. Azerbaijan's flag, I've always liked it. I like the names of people from Azerbaijan. Rafael Fiziev, Nazim Saidakov, Farman Hassanov, newcomer that we'll get to. Tahir Abdullayev. And Tafik Masayev also, who I cannot believe is not on this card. I think Tafik Masayev is fighting... well, let's find out. It's worth thinking. I love Tafik Masayev for his history in Ryzen and in Bellator. He is also from Azerbaijan, 36 years old, coming off his first win in the UFC against Ignacio Bahamondes, of all people. Yeah, he's fighting Ludwig Klein August 1st in Belgrade, Serbia. Who's he fighting in Serbia? Ludwig Klein. Oh, well. Yeah, I don't know if they're like... And also, like, Ludwig Klein isn't from Serbia. He's from Slovakia. I don't know if they're neighbors. They feel any, like, kinship towards each other. But already, like, baseless conspiracy theory. I think the UFC was mad at Tafik Masayev for his win against Ignacio Bahamondes for any rule violations, even though he looked good in that fight. I thought he looked great. I was happy, even though he did get away with a lot of stuff in that fight. And I know people question the decision anyway, but like maybe the UFC is punishing Tafik Masayev, not fighting in Azerbaijan. You're fighting in Serbia against Ludwig Klein, who I think has to be closer to Serbian than Tafik Masayev. Is that going to get me in trouble? I don't know. I really shouldn't talk about any part of like Europe that isn't like Spain, England, Italy, France, Germany. I'm familiar with those, and it's when you get further east that things get real cloudy. I just know I'm a big fan of the country of Azerbaijan, but my knowledge of all the other countries seems to blend together as it does for, many Americans like myself. Anyway, UFC Fight Night Baku going down Saturday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 9 a.m., so wake up. And obviously that's because that is in Azerbaijan. Different place in the world. The venue is the National Gymnastics Arena. I bet that place is hardcore as hell. I can't wait to see the cameras take us inside the locker rooms for warm-ups in the National Gymnastics Arena. There are 13 fights on this card, and we got a lot of combat sports this weekend. As I've said many times, because we got LFA 236, One Fight Night 44, Cage Warriors 208, PFL San Diego, Zayas versus Jerron Boots Ennis, Zuffa Boxing 8, BKFC Fight Night. We got a lot of combat sports this week, and I'm trying to get I'm really trying to get my act together, get my shit together, and get out short videos for those. Short videos are a lot more work even than just like typing into a tweet like I used to do with my picks. So, and with like a wife, a son, a young son, we're going through the process of moving into a different house. It's like I don't necessarily get a lot of times during the regular day to be like, all right, I got to go film like at least one take of a 2-minute video on these picks that I also have to know beforehand, or else it'll take half an hour. So I'm really doing my best with that. I hope that you're staying patient. If you're, some of the people that have messaged me on Instagram wondering where my picks have been, which I have to tell you that it's not like it's not hundreds of people. There's been like 2-3 people ever that have messaged me on Twitter or Instagram and be like, hey, you're not making like picks for LFA, or like, where's your BKFC picks? I have to tell you, man, that makes my year. When a stranger on a podcast like mine, where it's like, if I had like 50 views on this live stream, I'd be ecstatic. I do this for fun. But when strangers hit me up and they're like, oh man, like I was hoping to see you, I'm like, you know what? Like, I'm going to get my ass to work for this one individual. That is flattering as all shit when someone does that. And it happens like periodically. I'm confirming we're in a simulation like every few months. So, and it hits my recharge button. But anyway, if you're looking for, that stuff, that content I'm hoping to put out on PFL, One Fight Night, what have you, follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. And, like, subscribe on YouTube at Tap That MMA Podcast. I'm putting a ton of YouTube shorts out there. When I put these live episodes out through StreamYard, I'm putting out as many shorts as I can. Check out that easily digestible content and subscribe. So yeah, it's a good PFL event like to this week. I'm excited for it. Very PFL-y. How am I just now finding out that Cyborg is fighting and defending her featherweight PFL belt for the last time in August? If that was like previously known news, it escaped me, because I definitely didn't have the excitement inside me that I usually have when I know a Cyborg fight is coming up defending one of these belts. And if it was already announced, isn't that par for the course for PFL and Bellator? For a huge fight, with one of your biggest stars, if they can even get any of their biggest stars in the actual cage, the hell is... I heard Daniel Gumby Vreeland on the MMA Gambling Podcast of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network this week. Shout out to Gumby. He's been on this show before. Great dude. Knows the shit very thoroughly. And like, I'm going to echo his sentiment here. Do they have titles in PFL? There's no more of this grand, tournament format. I get that now. But this is just like Barnum and Bailey's, like just touring around to different, like, American cities, like Sioux Falls and, Oklahoma City and San Diego and Pittsburgh, Chicago. It's like, how about you have someone fight for a title more often than once every 2 years? Like, your champions are your biggest stars, and all they're doing is like guest commentary every once in a while with Sean and Randy and those fellas. So I swear to God, man, what do you have to do? How many do we have to do a letter writing campaign to get Dakota Dichiva in the cage more often than they've had her fighting? The best competition you can find for her, man. She might be the best flyweight on earth. You should be putting her out there. And Dakota Dichiva, she's young. She's, got a good personality. She's not like she's objectively not an ugly individual. Those are all that's all a great formula for, a star, especially in women's MMA. If you're a non-UFC promotion, for the love of all God, man, I get your champions and your stars in the cage more. And, there's they have their staples and their stars. They're going to be on the card in San Diego. AJ McKee, Liz Carmouche. I love Liz Carmouche. Alfie Davis is on the card. Abraham Babley and Rob Wilkinson. Jenna Bishop. There's, those people are fighting, but it's like, what in God's name are these people fighting for right now? Is there a title somewhere? Does someone have a belt somewhere outside of MENA and Africa and Europe? It was the same thing with Bellator, and Don Davis doesn't, that's great because that guy didn't even like fighting apparently. But it doesn't change anything. It's the same old story with Bellator and PFL. I loved the product of Bellator. I loved the feel of it. It had like a, kind of Strikeforce 2.0 kind of thing going on, which was kind of the point. But it wasn't like a knockoff. It had its own thing. I loved Bellator and all the great fighters that came from it. I have enjoyed the PFL product to a varying degree, but definitely there's a lot of times when I really enjoy the PFL product, all the best fighters that they do have to offer. I preferred the tournament format, honestly. It was unique. It made them different. And, those grand prizes at the end, whether that was sustainable or not, that stood out. And now PFL doesn't stand out. It's with ESPN right now, and it's just kind of sanitized, kind of neutered, and it's like they tried to make like a diet NFL version of MMA for ESPN once their relationship with the UFC was done. A promotion like PFL, when you're trying to be the bona fide second best promotion in the world, and you're competing with, other promotions that have a stake to that claim, there's gotta be an edge. There's gotta be a flavor, a feeling people get when they watch you. You got that with Strikeforce, absolutely. And Strikeforce is a lot more accurate than like Pride. Pride was a competitor. Pride was trying to be better than the UFC, and if not for the Yakuza, perhaps they would have been in the long term. But Strikeforce had a flavor. The WBC, they did something completely different. They had fighters at the top of their weight classes that in fights the UFC wasn't putting on. Bellator had a flavor and, had not an edge, but it was distinct. It was unique. It stood out. PFL does not. And it makes all the really kind of unique, cool, innovative ideas that they, hype themselves up on. The Jake Paul signing, the Francis Ngannou thing, all that stuff just became like what could have been really cool if they had executed well. It now looks bad, but like 2 times as bad as it would have looked good. It's just kind of a joke now. Like Jake Paul was gonna fight in MMA. Like you're trying to get like John Jones to box like Tyson Fury and people. What are they? What is the thing that we're supposed to be waiting on? What I did love, I love that they were doing women's featherweight and lightweight tournaments. I wish they would go back to that. Obviously, there's no Kayla Harrison. They did that specifically for her. But shit, go find your new thing. If Dakota Dichiva is your new Kayla Harrison and has the potential to be even, grander than that, and certainly she does, go put on just, have an event every few months that is Dakota Dichiva. Sign people that aren't even in the PFL. Sign, an Invicta flyweight. Sign, the Shudo flyweight champion. Dream. What? Just go find exciting people for her to fight. The frustration was always there with Bellator in that, they did not try at all to let people know that they were a fight promotion with, upcoming events. They did the opposite of marketing, where you could be a big MMA fan and love Bellator, and you could legitimately not know that they were having an event in 3 days. That is somebody not doing their job correctly. I could always look past that, though. I loved Bellator. I loved what they put on. But with PFL, I end up liking, I guess, the stuff that they put on, but, Jesus Christ, find a flavor. This is not a flavor. This is like the NFL Pro Bowl being played at Ford Field in Detroit. PFL is just like a big event that you don't exactly know what the relevance of it is supposed to be on any given week, and it's taking place, spiritually, symbolically, in a big, ugly shopping mall that is, built to appeal to the lowest common denominator, which is not people that watch MMA. So that's not a smart decision anyway, in my humble, uneducated in that particular department opinion. ESPN is a death sentence for MMA. The worst part is because it's a formula for success. And I don't think the UFC has necessarily abandoned some of those things yet with Paramount. ESPN just takes things that are the only thing that they haven't ruined are just small college sporting events on ESPN Plus. Because they don't have the resources and the energy to completely ruin those events. You can't when it's in a Cracker Box basketball arena on a college campus and somewhere in New Hampshire. And then I do like the MVP boxing events. I do like those, but that's more so because of the quality of fights that they put on and the fighters that, are on their cards that I enjoy that. There's always a lot of noise with those MVP cards. So went off in a different direction there for a little bit, but I couldn't stop me. You couldn't stop me, even if you wanted to. And before we get into my picks for the 13 fights on this card, I'm going to take you to a video on YouTube Shorts by the channel Drop a Pin Show, at Drop a Pin Show. Go subscribe to him because I'm going to play one of those videos. I have not pre-screened this, but this video is titled Everything You Need to Know About Azerbaijan.
Next up in our tour of every single country in the world alphabetically is Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has a population of around 10.5 to 11 million people, and it's located in the Caucasus, which is right on Eastern Europe and Western Asia. It shares a border with Georgia, Russia, Iran, and Armenia. Azerbaijan is one of the OGs when it comes to oil. It had oil reserves, it had oil industry way before Saudi Arabia and Texas. Even though Azerbaijan is only the size of Virginia and Maryland, it has 9 of the 11 different types of climate zones that you can find in the world, ranging from tundra environments all the way to alpine skiing and even some tea tropical plantations. Like I said, the oil industry there is booming. It's been booming since the 1840s, which is absolutely remarkable. Until the 1900s, half the world's oil supply came directly from Azerbaijan. It's not just crude oil, though. They have natural gas, too, and Yanar Dag is a hill that has been on fire for decades with just a little bit of natural gas seeping out. It's like an eternal flame. The language spoken is Azerbaijani, which is kind of a mixture of Turkish and Russian. A majority of people recognize themselves as by Russia and became part of that country, where it remained until the USS broke up in 1991. Gobustan National Park is where you want to go if you want to do a little tourism. They have 40,000-year-old markings that are inside a cave, and they have 350 different types of mud volcanoes, which basically looks like if the moon started to melt from the inside out. I feel like that's exactly what you would see. You would see these mud volcanoes. And if stained glass gets you hard as a rock, Shaki Khan's palace is a place that you're going to want to go. Look at this spot. Absolutely gorgeous. It looks kind of like a Turkish rug if that rug was made of glass. If you're interested in traveling around and getting a feel for smaller towns, Lahaj might be one of those. They have stone walkways all through these older towns that you could just tell are rich in history, rich in culture, rich in vibes, and the people apparently are some of the nicest on earth. If you're tired of backpacking and roughing it a little bit, Tufendang Mountain Resort might be the spot for you. They have black diamonds, they have spas, they have massage treatments, they have wineries, they have a little bit of everything. You might want to go check that out if you're feeling a little fancy. And if you want to get real weird with it, Nafenland is a resort area that you can go bathe in, wait for it. Crude oil, that's exactly right. They feel like crude oil gives you a little bit of je ne sais quoi to your skin. I don't know if I would try it, but it looks kind of relaxing, I guess. And once you get out of that oil bath, head back down to the Caspian Sea, and you can lounge on the beach, get a beach towel, and really soak up that salty sweetness. And that concludes the countries that start with A. Next up, we'll be talking about the Bahamas on our series of going through every single country in the world.
All right. Well, I learned something. I learned several things about Azerbaijan. So that was neat. Go follow that guy. Apparently he's going through every country alphabetically to talk about what it's like in a few minutes. I think we all could, maybe benefit from that. And I want to go try one of those crude oil soaks they got in Azerbaijan. They swear by it, when in Rome. I'd be willing to try it. And there's got to be a sound drop for that.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
I just haven't been using too many sound drops lately, and that's currently my favorite on the board, except for...
Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
That guy actually said that. Speaking of which, the Ultimate Fighter 34 got kicked off this past week. Already a lot of action going on. I think I need to catch up. 2 fighters, I believe, are in the semifinals already. And also, one more quick note before we move on is last week, UFC Fight Night at the Apex. Starboy gets the finish of Koji Horiguchi, avenges that loss from 9 years ago in Ryzen. And now, and I love Koji Horiguchi, and I would have been happy to if he had won. It would have been good either way. I think Koji Horiguchi still has a lot of competition to offer the entire UFC flyweight and bantamweight division. So I hope he sticks around and fights for as long as he wants to. But now, who's in the way of Starboy fighting for the UFC flyweight title? Amazing for all the hiccups, cancellations, bizarre performances, close losses. Amazing that after all that with Starboy, he's in this position now. And it's because, he's looked phenomenal, after his first few fights in the UFC. And, in hindsight, the dude's first fight in the UFC was against Alexander Pantoja. It was a close fight. A lot of people think he beat Matheus Nicolau in his second fight. And then the fight with Muhammad Mokaev was very confusing on both of their parts. Muhammad Mokaev no longer in the UFC. Let's bring that guy back and have a real rematch between Starboy and Muhammad Mokaev. I don't know what the plans are right now for the flyweight title. I forget, but how are we going to keep pretending? How long is this Muhammad Mokaev blackball thing going to go on?
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
He's one of the best bantamweights and flyweights in the world. And apparently, he's such a pain in the ass to work with. As compared to everybody else who has ever been on the UFC roster, in Dana White's time with the UFC. So rack your brain for that. That's a lot. That's a lot to deal with. Even just the 5 most handful of individuals. Muhammad Mokaev is one of the best fighters in the world at multiple weight classes. Get his ass back in the UFC. Let's stop pretending. And I'm sure there's information we don't have because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense at all. Maybe they thought he was boring. And they started, they went on that run of cutting boring, successful fighters, which I do think is insane. Get Muhammad Mokaev back in the UFC, and let's work this out and find out who the best flyweight in the world is. Between who's left between Joshua Van, Tatsuro Taira is still going to be around for sure. Starboy, Muhammad Mokaev, and some other points about last week's card. Navajo Sterling gets the win and gets the finish. Christian Rodriguez gets a finish over Haider Emil. Murtaza Magomedov gets another finish. This time it was a round 1 twister. Vinicius Oliveira gets the finish of Andre Fili. Glad that I was on that. Bia Mosquito with the submission. I think an absolute ton of people were on that. And I am just like, I also had a couple bucks on Gaston Bolanos over Michael Aswell Jr. I made that clear. I just, him as a minus 400 favorite, I love Michael Aswell Jr. But when you're going to be going the distance so much, and so much of your approach to the game is high volume, it does great work with his hands and has a great activity level. But that just leaves you up to close decisions if it ends up going 3 rounds and 29-28, all 3 judges' scorecards. So him being minus 400 was crazy. So I was happy to have sprinkled a little on Gaston Bolanos. Man Shabazian lost without getting a strike off. So it has not been a good tenure for him under the Contender Series / UFC banner. Luana Santos breaks through and gets a decision win over long-tenured bantamweight veteran Carol Rosa, which is a huge win for Luana Santos at, 26 years old? But, there was a combined 16 strikes landed in this fight, 2 takedowns, and it went the distance. But 2 more points. One, I'm mad at Alan Nascimento for losing a split decision in a fight that on paper, statistically, it looks like he should have won. But I'm more mad at either myself or at Mitch Raposo. Mitch Raposo is still young, but he's not like super young. He's like a year and a half older than me. So I guess he's still considered young in MMA when you're not 30. But Mitch Raposo, after his time on The Ultimate Fighter and after, his first 3 fights in the UFC, and granted, he lost his first 2 real UFC fights by split decision. So he was always right there against Sumata Hara and Andre Lima. But, got the decision win against Azat Maxim back at UFC 321 in a fight that you thought, like, all right, so it turns out that Azat Maxim actually just, isn't that good. Even though, he did have the win over Tyson Nam. I give that credit. But you gave him a little bit more credit, too, going into that Raposo fight because it's like, well, he lost, 2 in a row, but it was UD to Charles Johnson and a UD to Jiro Lembekov. His first 3 fights in the UFC were Tyson Nam, Charles Johnson to Jiro Lembekov, and he came out with 1 victory. And it's not easy to beat Tyson Nam by decision, so you figured he couldn't have been that bad. Then he gets, kind of dominated by Mitch Raposo. 29-27 on 2 card, 30-26 for Raposo on the other. And that was with Maxim getting the 7 takedowns against Mitch Raposo. I just thought that meant Azat Maxim actually wasn't as good as, his performances against that level of competition had indicated. Now Mitch Raposo's on a 2-fight winning streak. The decisions are starting to go in his favor. Beats Alan Nascimento by split decision. Congratulations to Mitch Raposo. I have a feeling that you're going to be sticking around the UFC, and I have a feeling I'm going to get every single fight that you have with the company moving forward wrong. I can feel that. I don't have a good feel for you, man. That is not, that's nothing again. I'm just not going to predict your fights correctly. I can already see that. If I was smart moving forward, I would tell myself I'm going to, be abstinent on betting on Mitch Raposo fights. But I can guarantee I'm going to break that immediately because I'll see the next one and be like, no, I think I know what's going to happen now. I think this is too big of a step up. Or like, no, like, this is a step down. He just beat Alan Nascimento. Both of those things are going to get me in trouble. So that was the Mitch Raposo performance. So frustrating that I had Alan Nascimento and some parlay. I thought that number was good. It was like minus 170. But the other thing I did want to toot my own horn about a little bit was the Kevin Boras win by unanimous decision over Andre Lima.
Fuck off. Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
29-28 on two judges' scorecards, 30-27 on Saldi Amatos for Kevin Boras. He's now won 2 of his last 4. And, had Emmanuel Rodriguez on the ropes, back in February. I could not understand why Kevin Boras was plus 400 against Andre Lima. I say things like that, on a week-in, week-out basis, but glad to see that a couple of those, like with Gaston Bolanos and Kevin Boras, worked out as underdog moneyline plays this past week. Even though, my heart was, supporting Michael Aswell Jr., former guest on this podcast. Best of luck to you out there, Michael Aswell Jr. Love to have you back on the show someday. And, you're young, bounce back. You'll have more fights, and I have no doubt that you will win, the fights that you get matched up on. So yeah, what are you going to do? That wasn't an easy fight for him. And, odds makers don't do fighters any, favors by making them minus 400 favorites. And then to the layman crowd of MMA casual fans, they say, that guy's a fraud. Or he got beat by this huge underdog when he was supposed to be. Yeah, but the people that put that number there were just wrong, obviously. Gaston Bolanos didn't deserve to be disrespected that much. And, Michael Aswell was in a closer fight than that number indicated. That's not a knock on Michael Aswell Jr. It shouldn't be. So best of luck to Michael Aswell Jr. I really like that guy, and I'm looking forward to seeing his next win in the UFC. All right, that is enough of everything that I've said so far. 38 minutes in without making a single pick. Let's get started here. We got a welterweight matchup between Tahir Abdullayev and Jefferson Nascimento. Nascimento is now the minus 115 favorite. Abdullayev is the minus 105 underdog, very slightly. Abdullayev is from Azerbaijan. The crazy thing is when this fight hit DraftKings, I know Nascimento was the cheaper of the two by a moderate margin. And now, Nascimento is a very, very slight favorite. And that's a sentiment that I think I agree with. So Jefferson Nascimento doesn't say how old he is on Tapology. That's always a good sign from Brazil. 13-0 as a professional. 5 wins by knockout, 3 by submission, 5 by decision. He is 5-0 in Shudo Brazil. He is 6-0 under the LFA banner. And they were not gimme fights at all. His debut in LFA was against 12-6 Urian Carlos in 2022. Got a knockout over 5-0 Mateus Rocha. Split decision over 12-3 Italo Gomez. Second round knockout for the LFA interim lightweight title against Gabriel Costa, November 2023. Defended the interim lightweight LFA belt September 2025 and won by unanimous decision over 7-1 by Sanger Makayev. And then May of this year, just back on May 29th, got a round 4 body kick knockout to once again win the LFA interim lightweight belt. He originally won the interim lightweight belt November 2023, defended it, and then I guess had to re-win it at LFA 234. So in total, this guy has been interim lightweight champion at LFA interim for almost 3 years, up until signing with the UFC. And that was a knockout over Guillen Marente, who was 9-1. 9-1, 7-1, 8-0, 12-3, 5-0, 12-6. Those were his opponents in LFA. 3 of those 6 LFA fights were for a belt. Very impressive undefeated resume coming in. It is not, if you came out of, you came out of Eternal MMA, you came out of New England, you came out of Brazil, and you're, 6-0, and you got like those caution marks on Tapology saying like that fight is, of questionable legitimacy, or you fought guys that were 1-5, and you've only fought one guy with a winning record. No, this guy has fought legitimate dudes on the LFA level of the sport at a title level and came out unscathed at 13-0. That is incredibly impressive. Now, Tahir Tank Abdullayev, 21-3 as a professional, 29 years old. Dude is more of a legit welterweight. That is meaningful here. But here I have the questions. His resume is definitely not like bullshit or anything. We know what those look like. He does have like a few fights back in M1 Challenge. Remember them? Wasn't against anybody like, crazy or anything, but he's fought in AMC Fight Nights and MMA series, those promotions. But the thing you're like really gotta like draw from for him is that he is 2-2 in UAE Warriors. He's 3-0 in Fight Nights Global. With UAE, he beat an 18-5 opponent back in 2021. Lost to Josh Togo by unanimous decision 2022. Won the UAE vacant welterweight title May of 2024, knocking out Shakaban Alkhazov, who was 8-0 at the time. Lost that title October of 2024 to Kodem Boynazarov, who was 9-0 at the time. He's now won 4 fights in a row. One was against 14-7 Oleg Kosanov in Ural FC, URAL. That was June of 2025. And then his last 3 opponents at Bet City Fight Nights, New Generation Fighting, and GFC 33 combined with GBC3. Love cross-promotion things with the multiplication symbol in the middle. Combined record of those opponents is 12-10 of those 3. So he definitely hasn't been, going crazy leading up to this fight. This is going to be in Azerbaijan. For Tahir, I don't know how, that could be good, that could be bad. It's not like he's 21 years old. He's, 29. He is an experienced professional. He was born in Baku. Foundational style is Letway. Go listen to my episode with Rachel Beauchamp. If you want to hear about how intense that particular discipline is. Fighting in Azerbaijan aside, that's going to make him more comfortable, not having to travel. You're familiar with where you are, all that stuff you just kind of don't have to worry about. And this guy has, mostly been a finisher throughout his career. 16 of his 21 career wins are inside the distance. 9 were by knockout. And there are those UAE victories. One title win that was now over 2 years ago. I don't think he's been finished ever. Oh, yeah, he got subbed back in M1 in 2018. But I'm not going to let that bother me too much. I'm really all in on Jefferson Nascimento minus 115. I think, like, as to how this fight ends, anybody's guess. We got a 13-0 dude from Brazil coming up a weight class, traveling to Baku, fighting a guy from Baku who's a natural welterweight, whose resume is, nice, not as legit as Jefferson's. He's had a lighter schedule coming into this fight. They're both mostly finishers. Anybody's guess how this fight ends up actually ending, because Jefferson Nascimento has had a very healthy mixture of decisions and knockouts, especially in LFA. But minus 115 for the guy that I don't care about the weight class. I think he's going to be, a step quicker than Abdullayev. And I think that's more important than any power advantage that may or may not be there for people that are fighting at a certain weight class. So give me Jefferson Nascimento, money line, minus 115. He moves on to 14-0. Hit it. Next up, we got a bantamweight matchup between Beksat Almakhan and Jean Matsumoto. Matsumoto, I got him at minus 155 on DraftKings early in the week. He's minus 152 right now on BetOnline. Beksat the plus 132 underdog. Beksat has lost 2 of 3 fights in the UFC. That's not super telling because his UFC debut was against Umar Nurmagomedov a little bit over 2 years ago. He got shut out in that fight for the most part. Got outstruck 68-3, got taken down 5 times, controlled for 11.5 minutes. But he did get a knockdown of Umar in that fight, which was crazy. But it tells you that there's absolutely something there with Beksat Almakhan. And then he goes on to knock out Brad Katona, who... goes on to knock out Brad Katona, who had never been finished in the UFC, and I'm not sure he'd ever been finished in his 21-fight MMA career. So, to knock out Brad Katona was definitely eyebrow-raising. Then he's coming off a decision loss to Alexander Topuria back in November. Got outstruck 47-39, taken down twice, lost 29-28 on one scorecard, 30-27 on the others. Topuria, at this point, he's, got 2 decent decisions under his belt in the UFC and is 7-1. I don't know what to make of Topuria. And Beksat, obviously that guy has power. That'd be hard to deny from his first 2 fights in the UFC. And Beksat at 12-3, he's 28 years old. 10 of his career 12 wins are by knockout. He came in via Octagon with a C where he was 6-0. I don't even think he was a champion there. He just was on a big winning streak. 1, 2, 3. He also won at UAE Warriors against 14-1 Mauro Mastromarini, February 2023. Was fighting opponents with good records in Octagon with a C. This guy's got pop. We know that you don't want to be hit by him. Umar Nurmagomedov almost had his world shaken up because of the power that Beksat has. Now, Jean Matsumoto, 17-2 as a professional, 26 years old. 3 wins by knockout, 0 losses by knockout, 6 wins by submission, 0 losses by submission, 8 wins by decision. His 2 career losses are by decision. He's 1-0 in the Contender Series, 2-0 in LFA, 3-2 in the UFC. So his only 2 losses as a professional have come in the UFC since February 2025. And just to go back a little bit, all right, because this guy was the Fight Pro champion back in 2022. Fought opponents with, decent records to continue that title run. opponents in LFA, 9-1, 7-0. Then goes in the Contender Series and beats Casey Tanner by unanimous decision. Submits Dan Argueta. Beats Brad Katona by decision in what was a close decision. But you didn't take anything away from him. And you don't for pretty much anybody that's ever fought Brad Katona. 99.5% of people who at their in shape weigh 135 pounds in the world, 99.99, whatever, if they fought Brad Katona, it would end up being a close decision. That's how Brad Katona fights. So for G Matsumoto to win a unanimous decision over Brad Katona, that's a feather in his cap. So now he's lost 2 of his last 3. But again, those losses came to Rob Font by split decision after Matsumoto got 7 takedowns, controlled for 6 minutes and 15 seconds of the fight. It was 95-77 on the significant strikes in favor of Rob Font. So you lose a split decision to Rob Font. You come back and grab a unanimous decision or a split decision over Miles Johns when you got taken down 5 times, but you won the striking battle. And then you lose a split decision to Farid Basharat back in February. Striking was very close. Matsumoto got 7 takedowns again, had 4 minutes and 40 seconds of control time. And I very distinctly remember thinking that G Matsumoto won that fight. And it only fed into like people not liking Farid Basharat because that dude's undefeated, 15-0. He wins a ton of close decisions. It felt like this was going to be the one that was the loss, especially when Matsumoto was coming in as the plus 250 underdog in that fight. So if you had Matsumoto, you're feeling pretty good when they're about to read the judges' scorecards, and he ends up losing that split decision. Take that for what you will. Matsumoto very easily could be undefeated at 19-0 right now with wins over Rob Font and Farid Basharat. It was just one judge in both of those fights that, saw things differently than he needed. But, it does concern me that G Matsumoto, he ends up taking a lot of people's volume more than I like. And he ends up in these close decisions. And when you end up in a bunch of close decisions, unless you're someone like, Angela Hill or, Miles Johns is another one and just, didn't work for him against G Matsumoto. But those people that are just really good at winning close decisions, they do the things that when judges are trying to score a close fight, they hark back to those things that you did. Volume, grappling, the little thing that you get noticed and remembered that, determines whether a judge gives you a 10 or a 9. Matsumoto is, mostly good at that. You see it in beating Miles Johns and Brad Katona, and there's no shame in the least bit in those 2 split decision losses to Rob Font and against Farid Basharat, especially because I think he was the better fighter on that evening against Farid Basharat. The judges saw it how they saw it. That's a win for Farid Basharat, but I thought G Matsumoto was the better fighter. What I like here is, Bekzat hit Topuria with 39 shots, didn't drop him. If you're G Matsumoto, you want this fight to go as close to how Bekzat's Topuria fight went as possible. Topuria outstruck him just a little bit, got a couple of takedowns, a few minutes of control time, and, ended up winning pretty comfortably scorecards-wise. I think Matsumoto has the skill set to do that. I also think he's 26. We've seen, a really nice sample of performances from him in the UFC. And, at 26 years old, he's going to be improving. And, his best days are very likely ahead of him in the UFC. I think he's more well-rounded. Matsumoto could win this fight if it turns into mostly striking volume. If Bekzat decides to try to get some takedowns, I think, Matsumoto can handle that. If Matsumoto wants to avoid the power of Bekzat, he has his, takedown volume proclivity to lean on. And Bexot is used to finishing people. 10 of his 12 wins are by knockout. If this goes to the judges' scorecards, in my view, big advantage Matsumoto, because I don't think Bexot is going to rack up, a ton of volume standing up. And if Matsumoto just keeps busy in the striking, if he mixes in some takedowns, has, Bexot on his back for, a decent, little piece of time, Matsumoto is going to be in great position to end up with the decision victory here. So, and what did I say for Bexot? Out of his 3 losses, 2 are by decision. The other one is by submission. And Matsumoto does have 6 wins by decision or by submission. He hasn't won by submission since he submitted Dan Argueta. It's been mostly going the distance for Gene Matsumoto, and that's where I'm gonna lean for Gene here. I'm very comfortable taking him at minus 155 like I did earlier in the week. Here he's minus 152. And if I like him in DFS a lot, he was like at 7,500 or something. Maybe it wasn't that low, but I went at 70. It was like 8,400. It was a very reasonable price for, Matsumoto coming into the... Matsumoto by decision is plus 115. That's where I would go if I'm picking a method of victory. And I don't think it is crazy to say Gene Matsumoto wins by split decision. That's plus 900. Take a shot on it. And next up, we've got a welterweight matchup between Daniil Donchenko and Theodore Berggren. Daniil is the minus 460 favorite. Theodore, the plus 360 underdog. Let's talk about Daniil, the favorite, first. 13-2 as a pro. Only 24 years old. Dude is a tank for welterweight. Out of the Ukraine, 8 wins by knockout, 2 by submission, 3 by decision. His only 2 career losses are by decision. 2-0 in the UFC, 1-0 in 1 championship. And this guy won the Ultimate Fighter 33 just last year. And, he was the NYSA FC champion going into the Ultimate Fighter. The only losses he had was like 3 fights into his pro career in 2021. So that would have made him, 19? He lost at UAE Warriors 22 by unanimous decision. He lost by unanimous decision to Kaimbek Zanibek Ulu. Anytime you lose in something like NYSA or Octagon with a C by decision, and the guy's last name has that lowercase W, U, U, L, U, all lowercase, it's a perfectly acceptable loss to take, all right? You're a brave man for even accepting that matchup. But in NYSA FC, he ended up being the lightweight champion there, defended it once, goes on the Ultimate Fighter, beats Richard Martin by unanimous decision, beats Matt Dixon by knockout, then gets a knockout over Rodrigo Cezinando on the tough finale back in September. And then keeps the good times rolling, gets a unanimous decision win against Alex Morono back in February. He was supposed to fight Andreas Gustafsson on this card. And in steps Theodore Berggren. 8-3 as a pro. Dude is nicknamed Simba out of Sweden. 26 years old. Can't believe he is the older of the two, especially when you look at his picture on Tapology. Here, I'll show you. Yeah, I get it. Thank you, StreamYard. All right. That's Theodore. Looks super young. Looks wiry. Maybe it doesn't look like the full amount of bulk has kind of been, got, the full amount of man strength hasn't really, come into him yet. But 5 wins by knockout, 3 by submission, 0 wins by decision, 3 career losses, 1 by sub, 2 by decision. You can see it. You get it. And if you have UFC Fight Pass, then you're quite familiar with Theodore's work. because he was he's been a long running participant in Fight Club Rush, promotion out of that, I believe it's out of Sweden specifically, and it was on UFC Fight Pass a lot. And it's a good promotion. You get kind of a bigger spectrum of quality in that promotion for sure. But there are definitely good fighters there and that come out of there. His professional resume is just a little green. I mean, it's certainly not like Daniil's, or I don't even think Theodore has like a professional title fight that he's ever competed for. Not that I'm seeing. Michael Brush, nope. His last opponent was 8-2. He beat 3-1 Daniel Battaglia in Cage Warriors 195. His last 2 wins are by knockout. His last 3 wins are actually by knockout. This guy is a finisher for sure. Last loss, as you can see, to Leonardo Damiani. What's he got against Italians? By unanimous decision, March of 2025, and that was directly after he got submitted by Justin Burleson in Cage Warriors 181. He hasn't been knocked out. I don't know if he's fought anybody like Daniil, though, who, when you look at him, it is hard to believe that the dude is a welterweight. And this is like, this is more of a this is a late replacement for both of them, but like I think that always affects the fighter who was already planning to fight first, because Daniil was planning to fight Andreas Gustafsson. Theodore, from what I know about people on the prospect cusp like him, their people are like kind of waiting for a call like this. Maybe it's not always the UFC, but you're waiting for a call for a bigger opportunity. Guys like that, stay ready to go and, take a fight on short notice. That's how a lot of people, get the fights that they do on with the regional promotions throughout the year when, you're trying to make it to the big show. So I think that affects Daniil more, but I don't think that that'll be, I don't think that'll be the difference maker here. Like, we haven't seen like the best stuff from Ultimate Fighter winners in the last handful of years, but Myron Santos, that's one. But, definitely not Robert Valentin. That hasn't worked out. He didn't win it. Ryan Loder did. That hasn't worked out amazingly either. But getting the win over Alex Morono, outstruck him 100-40. Got a knockdown. Didn't get the finish. Now, Morono's, he's taking a lot of damage in the UFC. He's, in the ending stages of his career, you would assume. But still, like, to take on, right off the Ultimate Fighter, to take on a guy like Alex Morono, who has been in the UFC since 2016 at UFC 195. That is a ton of UFC experience to be fighting against fresh off the Ultimate Fighter, and he passed that test with flying colors. So I think Daniil is mentally strong. Yeah, have to be to win the Ultimate Fighter, and I think you'd have to be to come off and, beat Alex Morono in the fashion that he did, because that's a tough fight. And Theodore, I think Theodore is going to be hyped for this. I think Theodore is going to be ready. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. But I don't think that will be quite enough. So, for Daniil, is it 30-27, 30-26 for Daniil against Alex Morono? If I'm trying to pick something more specific here, Daniil by knockout is -165. I think that, that makes sense that that's the most likely, ending to this fight. I think Daniil by decision plus 375 is probably the better value, given the circumstances of, having a young prospect coming in place of Andreas Gustafsson on late notice. Maybe, Daniil is perhaps maturing a little bit, like in the experiences he's had, and maybe is being a bit more conservative and maybe patience the better word in his approach. We see fight Sean O'Malley never should have ended up fighting Chris Matinho as long as he did when Matinho stepped in. Some of these late replacement fights, like sometimes it ends in, exactly the way that you think, and sometimes someone like Daniil is, working through a little bit of a puzzle themselves when the fight starts. They're less familiar with the opponent, and maybe it takes a little longer. Maybe you don't get to finish. So I think Daniil by decision plus 375 is the best value of the method of victories. For Daniil to cover the spread of minus 3.5, it's minus 325. Not as good as I was hoping for. You could do Daniil. You do Daniil by unanimous. Wait, why is unanimous decision? That is plus 325 when by decision is plus 375. That's dumb. You could do like a method of victory double chance with decision or knockout. And hopefully that's a good enough number to make it worth it to, put it in a parlay or something. If I was going to try to get real cute with this, let's see. Now, Theodore, when you've been finished on one occasion, having around 3. Yeah, if I was going to get like cute with it and try to thread the needle and be real specific, I'd go Daniil by knockout in round 2. That's only plus 425. I don't think that's as good as value by decision at plus 375. That's where I'm going. Let's go Daniil. Rooting for you. Still super young. And, got a great deal of momentum behind him. So, but God, a guy like Theodore Bergeron, who has, had to have been on the UFC's radar for, quite some time through Fight Club Rush. Huge opportunity for Theodore. No brainer. He's a young guy too. And he has an opportunity to come in, play spoiler, and steal that whole bag of momentum that Daniil's been working, for years to accumulate on this winning streak from Niza, the Ultimate Fighter, and now in the UFC. Next up, holy shit, I'm doing 3 fights. We have a featherweight match between Kyan Offley and Javier Reyes. Reyes is minus 182. I think I got him minus 170 early in the week. And then Offley is the plus 157 underdog. Javier Reyes, 2-0 in the UFC, counting the Contender Series, both first-round knockouts over Justice Torres and Douglas Silva de Andrade in his UFC debut back in February. Douglas Silva de Andrade has been in the UFC since 2014 and has fought so many great fighters of these weight classes. As a win over Marlon Vera and Renan Barao, Cody Stamen. He's fought Rob Font and Piotr Yan, Lerone Murphy, Saeed Nurmagomedov. So to come in immediately, Javier Reyes, who is not a young guy, like born in 93, that is a statement of a win to be able to come into the UFC immediately and get 23-5 as a professional, 32 years old, 11 wins by knockout, 8 by submission, 4 by decision, 2 losses by knockout, 1 loss by decision, 2 losses by decision. Did I say 1 loss by submission, 2 by decision? 2-2 in LFA. Let's take it back a little bit. Let's find a good little sample size here. So he fought in Combate Global for a little period of time there. 3 of his pro losses were 2019 and earlier. 2 of those were in Combate, and he had a lot of pro fights before that. He only has 2 losses in the last 7 years. 13. in what has been like 15 fights. So like 2 losses in his last 15. He was the matchmaker world featherweight champion in co-promotion with Combate Global, apparently. Has a win over Chase Gibson in LFA. He got knocked out by Larian Douglas at LFA 190. Won the FFC Título Mundial FFC matchmaker at Peso Pluma. I have no idea what the hell that means, but it sounds important. Won in Buda Ascento, lost to Chris Makate at LFA 208 by unanimous decision. Makate is still in LFA. And then Reyes went on the Contenders Series. At first, he beat Lance Lawrence at LFA 210, submitted him. Gets a knockout over Justice Torres, who I believe cut his teeth in Fury FC, and then gets a knockout very quickly against Douglas Silva de Andrade. Ken Offley, nicknamed Genghis, is out of Turkey, 13-4-1 as a professional. He was born in Melbourne, Australia. He's fighting out of Melbourne, Australia. 6 wins by sub, 5 by decision, 2 wins by knockout, 3 losses by decision, 1 loss by knockout, 2-2 in the UFC, 3-1 in Australian Fighting Championship, 3-0 in Hex Fight Series. He was the Hex Fight Series featherweight champion back in February 2023. It was right after that he ends up going on The Ultimate Fighter, beating Nathan Fletcher by unanimous decision, getting a guillotine over Rody Roets out of South Africa. Then he gets knocked out by Myron Santos in the Ultimate Fighter finale. He loses by unanimous decision to Muhammad Naimov in what was statistically a close fight, but it was 29-28, 30-27, 30-27. So it was not as close in reality as it was on paper. Offley is off 2 straight victories, though. Against Ricardo Ramos, he got a rear naked choke there. And Ricardo Ramos, that's a recognizable name, getting the submission that, or even though Ricardo Ramos hasn't done a lot of winning over the last handful of years, you know, that's still a very experienced guy. That is a meaningful submission victory. At UFC 325, which is at the end of January, he fought Yiza. Got outstruck 68-48. Got knocked down once. Got taken down 3 times. Ended up getting most of the control time in the fight. He didn't have a knockdown. He didn't have a takedown. He was 20 significant strikes short of Yiza and ends up winning over Yiza by unanimous decision. Crazy thing is, I remember it like it was yesterday that I was still writing those DFS values picks articles. And I was reluctantly on Ken Offley as an underdog in that fight. Reluctantly. Because even still with like the Ricardo Ramos win, Yiza at 26-6, like and even with my skepticism of, road to UFC resumes, I wasn't feeling awesome about that. Then when it goes to the judges' scorecards, I was feeling way worse about it. And Ken Offley ends up getting the majority decision. I do not think he won that fight. I think Yiza was the better fighter on January 31st at UFC 325. So I don't really count that spiritually as it's a win, but for the purposes of projecting how he does against Javier Reyes, it's not to me. And I think like where Reyes hasn't lost by submission since May of 2018. That was his only submission loss ever. Ken Offley is not a knockout threat. What Ken Offley is going to have to do is, do some grappling, do some wrestling. That hasn't been like, how he's won up to this point, really. But because I think if he tries to mix it up too much with Javier Reyes, he is going to get caught. And I don't, even if he doesn't get finished by Javier Reyes, I don't think that you want to keep taking your chances with getting dropped and hurt and, making it to the end and hoping you get a crazy decision. That's not going to work out well long term. So, I guess just one more note on Javier Reyes. 11 wins by knockout. Yeah. 11 wins by knockout. That's mostly how he's, won in his pro career. Always been knocked out once, never submitted. Yeah, Ovley's good at going the distance. But I think Javier Reyes isn't a talent and doesn't have the potential of Myron Santos. And, like Muhammad Naimov, that's a guy that you would have thought like had a good chance to knock Offley out too. Here, the thing is that like I am confident in Javier Reyes here. I am going to keep trusting that I don't think Cain Offley should have won that last fight. And I was still very, very much on the fence with him even after the Ricardo Ramos win. It was like against Naimov and against Myron Santos, he didn't look like the same guy that we had seen on The Ultimate Fighter, who beat Nathan Fletcher and Roddy Rhodes. And the Fletcher win is the more impressive of those two, really. It hasn't gone great for Rhodes since The Ultimate Fighter, to my understanding, last time I saw. But, like, Offley just did not knock my socks off in any particular category.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
Javier Reyes is exciting. And Offley is going to have to, like, really work hard on this one. And, it's kind of similar to, stylistically, it's not that far away from the Yiza fight. And if you told me that Cain Offley was fighting Yiza tomorrow, I would still put the confidence of my money and wagers and whatever in Yiza. So give me Javier Reyes. He's minus 182 now. He was minus 170 earlier in the week. And by knockout is, let's see what by knockout is. Okay. Reyes by knockout is plus 225. By decision is plus 275. What this tells me is, I think it's a coin flip, really, between Reyes by knockout and Reyes by decision. So I would say this is one where go ahead and do a method of victory double chance if that's available to you with whatever platform you're using, because I think it's going to be a perfectly acceptable number for a guy that's minus 182, and those are the numbers for the two most likely method of victory props for him. And if I was going Offley, I would go by decision, but that's a plus 275. And I don't love that either. But I mean, the other method of victory ones are, high up there for Offley. But Offley, like, to win by split or majority decision is plus 1,000. I'd give that a look, because I think that, to win this fight based on that last one he had, he would need a judge to see things differently than what most of us are seeing. So, if this goes the distance, I think Offley probably takes shots. I think it's a high pace. And Offley sometimes is just a little bit forgettable. It's not that he's not skilled. It's just that sometimes he's a little bit forgettable. And Javier Reyes kind of steals your attention when he's fighting. I think that's, not to be ignored as a factor if it ends up going to the judges. Next up, we got a middleweight matchup between Nursultan Ruziboev and Andrei Puliev. Puliev is the plus 180 underdog? Really? Plus 180? I feel like he must have taken some money in the week, because I cannot imagine that he was plus 180 to start the week. Let's talk about Fiziev then. 10-4 as a pro, 6'4", 78-inch reach, pretty big. 2-2 in the UFC, counting the Contender Series. Beat Liam Anderson by unanimous decision. Lost to Christian Leroy Duncan. Got his ass whooped on my birthday of 2025, March 22nd. What was it? 30-26. 30-27, 30-27. Christian Leroy Duncan tore him up. He ends up getting a knockout over Nick Klein. Got taken down a few times. Nick Klein will, dive for those submissions, and that ends up, sometimes that works, and sometimes it gets you knocked out. That's what happened here. So that's an important win to get. It shows that, even if you get taken down, you're not, it's not a cakewalk to get to a submission from there, and then you recover from that, and you get the finish. Then he fought Atiba Gautier. January this year at UFC 324, lost by unanimous decision. He actually landed more strikes than Atiba Gautier. Gautier knocked him down twice in that fight. It was 29-28 on two of the scorecards. You didn't even win if you had the point spread for Gautier in that fight. There was 130-27. Here's the lesson with Andre Fiziev. All right, because everybody was looking past this, myself included, if I recall. Everybody was looking past this point going into the Gautier fight, and thought Gautier, a big, scary-looking dude, Fiziev, he looks like he works in like Russian IT. He's not like he's a big dude. He looks like a good fighter, but he's not like Atiba Gautier is an intimidating thing to look at. And everybody thought Fiziev was going to get, absolutely dragged. He has only ever been knocked out once. That was back in 2023 to 4-0 Anvarbek Danielbekov at Storm on the Neva. As an amateur, he was never knocked out. I think he was only finished once. His other 3 losses as a pro have come by decision, even when he was getting his ass torn up by CLD and getting, absolute meat hammers landed on him by Atiba Gautier. Some people are just really hard to finish, and that is Andre Fiziev. There's not always rhyme or reason to it. Every fighter thinks they're tough. Every fighter, for the most part, comparatively speaking for the rest of us, is tough. But Puliev's just got this different thing going on. He's very hard to finish, and that is a dangerous quality in an opponent. Nursultan Ruziboev, winner of 4 of 5 fights in the UFC, 3 of 4 by knockout, knocked out Bruno Ferreira, knocked out Cedricus Dumas. Knocked out Eric McConico. And then his most recent fight was over a year ago, May 2025, a unanimous decision win over Dustin Stoltzfus. At 130-27, outstruck him 35-21. The one loss on his UFC resume, because his pro record is 36-9-2. It's a lot of pro fights. His only loss in the UFC is to Joaquin Buckley at welterweight. And this is middleweight, right? Yeah. That was at welterweight. And that's not where you want to fight Buckley. Buckley ended up winning 29-27, 30-26, 30-27. Buckley got a knockdown. He struck him 86-31. Buckley got 4 takedowns and controlled for 5 minutes. Buckley was having his way in there.
Fuck off. Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
So, Nursultan, a lot of finishing. Against Dustin Stoltzfus, he didn't... Yeah, there wasn't a lot of volume to that fight from either dude. And I thought I was going to be a lot more confident in Nursultan, when I took my look at this earlier in the week. And I see why the line is what it is now. Because Nursultan, like in his 4 fights in the UFC, it has been around the same level of competition outside of Buckley where he didn't win. Before coming into the UFC, yeah, he's an Octagon with a C. He was an Alash Pride, Brave CF. It bounced around a lot and took losses. Most of these are wins. Not like what is credible about his resume is just that there's so many fights that he's won. Eventually, you go around that part of the world fighting people. If you're not that good, eventually you that comes to a head and you end up losing more than you win. But Nursultan has only lost once since December of 2019. And there's like, let's do the math here. 31, 33. That was 14 fights ago. So he's lost only one fight in his last 14 fights, and it was to Joaquin Buckley at welterweight. I have to say that, like, Puliev is absolutely a live dog here at plus 180. I did not have that feeling earlier in the week. I had my thought of, like, look, Puliev is tough. That'll get you through 3 rounds, but I don't think it was going to get him a lot of wins in the UFC. But, yeah, he wore Atiba Gaudier down. He got, a round on from 2 of the judges. But even still, like, Puliev didn't have, like, a reputable professional record before coming into the Contender Series either. And, even a win over Nick Klein, that's still a Contender Series level win, essentially. The Gaudier performance is interesting, but I think that speaks more to the growing pains and the learning curve for Atiba Gaudier. Like, you can't get everybody out of there, and you got to adjust to that accordingly. So, I still have to think that Nursultan is the, rightful favorite here, minus 210. I think this could end up being a close fight. I think this could end up coming down to a round 3. Or I think, Nursultan could get the first 2 rounds and, maybe Puliev catches him by surprise and the last round ends up getting that one. But I think Nursultan Ruzbov should end up with this win. Because I think if Nursultan's 4 UFC wins are all kind of like, essentially, like, that's like the bottom tier, whatever, of the UFC middleweight division, the people that he has beaten in the UFC. But I don't know if Andre Puliev walks away with 4 wins if he fights those same 4 dudes at middleweight. I think him and McConaughey would probably be pretty close. I think Dustin Stoltzfus and him would be pretty close. I think Bruno Ferreira and him would be pretty close. But I don't think Nursultan ends up getting the knockout. I think that Nursultan should prepare to not get the knockout. Adjust your strategy in the fight accordingly. Because where you can run into trouble with Puliev is where you become surprised or frustrated or overly anxious about getting the finish, and it might not come. Puliev is really hard to knock out. And the bookmakers have Nursultan by knockout plus 140, Nursultan by decision plus 250. Give me Nursultan by decision plus 250. Hit it. And I would also say for Puliev to cover 3.5 points, that's plus 130. I would think about that too. That's a nice one to be able to add in there because, if this goes the way I'm saying, Nursultan ends up getting, or maybe it did cover the spread with the T, but that makes sense. Yeah, you just wouldn't cover the spread if it was all 29-28. I think Pulev could win this fight, but I also think that, like, he could win, several of these rounds. Now, you can get one, more or less, from each of the three judges. And so Pulev to cover 3.5 plus 130. I don't hate that either. And you could win on that, and you could still win on Nursultan by decision. Thread the needle there. Yeah. That's a tough one. I have a feeling that Andrei Pulev isn't necessarily, out of surprises. So that's another guy that I'm going to have to keep a very close, I'm going to have to keep my finger on the pulse of where Pulev's going, because his fights are tough to predict because he's proven so difficult to finish. Light heavyweight. In here. I'm going to cue something up here. Bear with me.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
All right, here we go.
Spot is your modern solution to top-ranked pet insurance in America. With benefits like up to 90% cash back and 24/7 pet telehealth, it's no wonder thousands of pets are wagging their tails at Spot.
All right.
Tigers, bring it in. Let's go. Let's go, guys. All right, Tigers. Let's go, okay? That's easy for you. Just chop block them in the back, just sitting around, all right? You hear me?
I don't think that's a very good attitude. You can't talk about hurting other players.
You don't think? You don't think? I don't think you should be butting in when I'm talking to my team. You're my assistant, okay? You're supposed to back me up and go get me juice boxes when I tell you. Now go get me a juice box.
You know who you're talking to?
I'm talking to the juice box guy.
You're crazy.
I'm not crazy. I'm just thirsty.
Well, you go to hell.
No, you go to hell. While you're there, why don't you grab me a juice box?
I'm no juice box boy, I'll tell you that.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
No, I'm not. You're like your old man.
I'm not like my old man.
If it weren't for these kids, I would whip your butt.
I can take a punch.
I'm out of here. Bye-bye. I'll see you, Mr. Big Time Coach. Bye-bye.
I'm not like my old man. I'm a kind and gentle, compassionate human being with a heart as big as a lion. We'll see you later, Juice Box. Everyone wave goodbye to Juice Box.
All right. That idea just came to me because the next fight is at light heavyweight between Abdul Rahman Yakayev and Julius Juicebox Walker. Former guest on this podcast is Julius Juicebox Walker. Love Juicebox. And Juicebox here is the plus 425 underdog. Abdul, the minus 600 favorite. Let's talk about the favorite first. Abdul Rahman Yakayev, the hunter, 9-0 as a pro, 25 years old, 6'2" with a 78-inch reach, 3 wins by knockout, 5 by submission, 1 by decision, 2-0 in the UFC, 2-0 in ACA, 1-0 on the Contender Series. Obviously, the guy has never lost as a professional. The first few fights of his career, I take it back. The first 2 fights of his career was in the ACA Young Eagles, where if you're finishing people, ground and pound via triangle choke, dudes named Nazmuddin Yusupov and Elbek Ravshanov, you already know this guy's got skill. And this was in 2021 and 2022. This guy was like 21 years old. Was the Khan fight light heavyweight champion, beat 7-0 Nikolai Kovalenko for that title. Goes right to Aries FC, wins their light heavyweight title over Pauline Begay, who was 5-2 at the time, defends against Jackie Jean, who was 4-1. Goes right into the Contender Series after he was 5-0 when he hit the Contender Series. And boy, did he hit it! Because he gets a first-round knockout over Alik Lawrence, August of 2025. We see him right back for Fight Night, November of 2025 against Rafael Cerquera. Gets a first-round submission there. And then just back in April this year at another Fight Night event, for his second fight officially in the UFC, gets another first-round rear naked choke against Brinson Ribeiro. This guy has only ever gone the distance once as a professional, and for all of his finishes, which is 8 of them, all but one was in the first round. Both Aries FC title fights were in the first round. His Contender Series fight was ended in the first round. Both UFC fights were ended in the first round. Abdulrahman Yakiyev is, at 25, potentially, one of the next, stars of the light heavyweight division. He's got star power to, the way that he fights and his personality as well. But I just mean that this guy is someone that we could see fighting, guys with single-digit numbers next to their names, very soon. But now Julius Juicebox Walker, 26 years old, 6'4" with a 78-inch reach. Juicebox played college basketball. The dude is an athlete, has agility for light heavyweight, and he's big because he's been at heavyweight too before in the past. When I had him on the show, he had beaten Niall Bartling. He'd been at heavyweight, right? I'm not making that shit up. Yeah, he was at heavyweight. He weighed in at 254 pounds at one point. That's crazy. But beat Niall Bartling, that's a recognizable dude who I think came down to light heavyweight for that fight at Synergy FC. He defended that light heavyweight title against UFC veteran Bevan Lewis. And then he wins the Peak Fighting Light Heavyweight Championship against former Glory kickboxer Myron Dennis. That's how he got the call for the UFC, which I believe was on short notice to come in and fight Alonzo Minifield. So here's how it's going for Juicebox in the UFC. He loses a split decision to Alonzo Minifield, where people afterward were doing the bullshit of cut both of them. Or, that fight sucked. They both look horrible. Well, dude, I don't know, man. I don't throw words like that around about fighters at this level willy-nilly, because they're all pretty in shape for the most. They exercise and practice fighting a lot. So if they end up really tired in a fight with another guy that trains a lot and prepares his body a lot for fighting, there must have been a decent reason why both of them ended up looking tired. So Juicebox had a really admirable performance against Alonzo Minifield in his UFC debut, and that could have been a win against like a formerly, I think Alonzo Minifield was formerly ranked at the time. That would have been a huge win to start his UFC run. He was one judge away from doing it. Maybe I'm a little biased. I kind of thought he won that fight. But as they got more tired and as the fight got a little sloppier, it was just harder to tell. He has a common opponent with Yakiyev, and that's Rafael Cerqueira. That's Juicebox's one UFC win. That was August of last year. Beat him by unanimous decision. Outstruck him 44-19. Got a knockdown. Got 6 takedowns. 11 minutes and 50 seconds of control time. He won that decision 30-27, 30-27, 30-26. Hell of a win for Juicebox. And frankly, that might say a little more. I can, you like to be able to get the finish, but there's not one area of that fight where Julius did not, display his skill set. And, anytime you get a 30-26 from any judge, and you end up getting the win, that was a good performance. So beating Cerqueira like that over the distance, mixing in takedowns, getting a knockdown, still, beating Cerqueira in the striking volume, that was a great performance. Then he gets matched up with Dustin Jacoby, another opportunity to fight a guy who was a formerly ranked light heavyweight. That was February of this year. The first round went great for Julius. He got 3 takedowns in the first round. And ended up controlling for like almost 3 minutes. The problem was, it seemed like he wasn't, enthusiastic about kickboxing with Dustin Jacoby, who is, quite skilled in the area of kickboxing and boxing. Yeah, take a look at his past. Julius went heavy into the wrestling in the first round, and he, picked Dustin Jacoby up a couple of times and kind of slammed him down to the ground. It looked like he dumped a lot of energy in that first round to get that, to end up taking the first round. And by the second round, the energy wasn't there. Dustin Jacoby starts teeing off with the striking, ends up getting a finish and outstruck Julius by the end of it 42-7. So, Julius Walker lost to two. His only two losses are to guys that at light heavyweight, even though they're a little bit older, they've taken their losses at this point, to formerly ranked light heavyweights. Not that long ago, Dustin Jacoby should have gotten the win over Khalil Roundtree. Don't forget that. Split decision, lost to Alonzo Menifield, and then, a knockout loss to Dustin Jacoby, who can do that to a ton of people at light heavyweight, let alone a guy who, at that point, that was his 9th professional fight, Julius, after, mostly being a basketball player for the majority of his life. And, Julius did what he had to do to get, to take round one. He just put so much stock in that area of the fight that he didn't have anything left, it seemed, after round one. I think that, Julius's cardio, he's going to have to be able to, go at a fast pace for this first round and still be able to fight if the bell sounds for round two. Because for for 8 finishes that Yakiyev has in the first round, that Yakiyev is coming out aggressive and looking to lock in a rear naked choke. Julius has never been submitted. I know he is quite proud of his jiu-jitsu game. Looking to get a choke, get it down to the ground and, take his back, be looking to, land a nugget. Yakiyev is a hunter, and he does fantastically lethal work in round one. So Julius will have to survive round one, and then we'll have to get off the stool and fight for, however much longer it goes on for, which he was able to do with Rob Joe-Cerqueira. That was an easier matchup. That was his first win by decision. So I think that's something clearly that is coming along in his game, is that ability to, because Julius had mostly finished everybody in round one as a pro leading up to his fight with Alonzo Menifield too. So that's something that he's still adjusting to. He's only a year older than Yakiyev. Maybe this is me, being a starry-eyed, wishful thinker, rooting for my boy Julius Juicebox Walker. But this is like fighting Terrence T-Rex McKinney on Russian steroids. Yakiyev could very well be a light heavyweight champion someday. I think a lot of people could. I'm not going to rule that out for Julius Walker either. Long way to go for that, but, certainly you can. Look at Carlos Ulberg. The guy's a model, obviously. Look at him. He, what was he, a rugby player or Australian football, something like that? I know he was one of those. People live all kinds of lives before they end up winning belts. Julius, you survive round one against Yakiyev, and then see what Yakiyev has left. He hasn't gone the distance. That one fight that he went the distance was his title fight at Con Fight 2, January of 2023, almost 3.5 years ago. Julius, you just went the distance for a victory just back in August. And you had your hard lesson against Dustin Jacoby about how to manage your energy over the course of a fight. I think, naturally, Yakiyev inside the distance is minus 325. Julius is tough as hell. Yakiyev in round two is plus 375. I think that's the best value you're going to get on anything for Yakiev in this fight. So if I was going Yakiev, I would go in round 2. Yeah, and I wouldn't go inside the distance in like a parlay at that number because I think that it's very possible that, Julius does survive the course of this fight. People's tendencies, especially when they're, they've only had 9 pro fights, those things change as you move on. Of course, you finish people on the way to the UFC in round 1 and round 2 all the time. And then you fight people who are also in the UFC, and it gets tougher and tougher to finish people. You change as a fighter. So Yakiev in round 2, plus 375. Yakiev by decision is fucking plus 600. That's something to look at, but also something to look at here. What I sprinkled a little bit on, I used Yakiev in maybe like a parlay or 2, something like that. But I also sprinkled a little on my boy Julius Juicebox Walker, money line, plus 425. Hit it. You've had your harder lessons in the UFC, Juicebox. You fought 2 formerly ranked light heavyweights, and in different ways, you had success in both of those fights. These are learning opportunities, and if you learn from those fights, and if you could, are working on those parts of your game that you needed to patch up, you learned, from what went right against Rafael Fiziev, take Abdul Yakiev into some deeper water, get him frustrated, have a little bit of doubt creep in. If he's not able to put you away in round 1, then it's anybody's fight. Make it to round 2, Julius, and it is a completely different fight because I think that you're going to be a lot better situated if it hits round 2 than you were, just back a handful of months ago when you fought Dustin Jacoby. So, yeah, I'm sprinkling a little bit on Julius Juicebox Walker.
Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
Next up, we got a welterweight match. I'm going to have to absolutely rip through these. My God, what is taking so long? Oh. Welterweight, we got Farman Hassanov against Eric Nolan. Eric Nolan, sizable underdog in this one. No, he's not. Plus 152. Hassanov minus 177. Let's start with Eric Nolan. 8-4 as a pro. Nicknamed Nighttime. 28 years old. 4 wins by knockout, 2 by submission, 2 by decision, 2 losses by sub, 2 losses by decision. 8-3 in Cage Fury. Love to see that. Lost to Ty Miller by split decision. Was his first loss back in April of 2022. Ty Miller is a recognizable name. One of his losses was by split decision to Alonzo Turner. You probably recognize that name too if you ever, were following Cage Fury stuff. One of his other losses was a submission loss to Blaine Richards at Cage Fury 118. And later, Eric Nolan, after a winning streak in Cage Fury, ends up fighting for the Cage Fury welterweight title. And my cat's scratching on the door. Ends up winning and avenging that loss to Blaine Richards with a first-round knockout. May of 2025. That's when he got the call to come to the UFC. On I believe it was late notice because they did everything I believe in their power to get Bisangas or Serkayev on UFC 319 after he had just won the Contender Series and said, "Yo, put me on UFC 319." They said, "Let's get Eric Nolan," and he ended up getting submitted in round 2 against Serkayev. Now, Farman Hassanov. 5-0 as a professional, nicknamed the Lion. He is out of Azerbaijan. 30 years old. 3-0 in LFA. I was so ready to not even give this guy the light of day of consideration because he's 5-0 and from Azerbaijan. And but the UFC's teeing him up here. Like, they're giving him what, appears to be a winnable fight here in Azerbaijan. How will he handle it at 30? God, I hope he have the maturity to handle that. But in LFA, beat 3-0-1 Luke Roberts by unanimous decision, knocked out 3-1 Mark Ari Lewis, and knocked out Abdurrahman Fazilov in round 1 at LFA 223. Fazilov was 6-0. That is enough for me to be quite impressed. 5 professional wins. 3 of them are against fighters with, winning records in LFA in a row. 2 of them by knockout. They have a combined record of 12-1-1. And Eric Nolan's never been knocked out. Is my reservation, and certainly some of the people he fought were very capable of that. Yeah, I mean, I think Eric Nolan's kind of live at plus 152. Like, Eric Nolan's a scrappy dude. He's scrappy. I don't necessarily see him hanging around the UFC super long. I just think that this dude it'll be hard to find matchups that he can win in the UFC, and I don't see him stringing together a bunch of wins in a row. I hope he does. That'd be awesome. And, fighters, improve and change the course of their career at, many different stages. But if I was going to go with Eric Nolan, I would want it to be offering more reward than plus 152 does. Hasanov at minus 177. At that number, you don't need to pick these specific method of victory. By knockout is plus 225 for him. That's a little presumptuous when you got Eric Nolan, who's been around, cage fury and quality fighters and hasn't been knocked out before in 12 pro fights. By decision is plus 325. I think I would go by decision plus 325, considering that, Hasanov might have some nervous energy. This is about to be a 6 pro fight. It's in Azerbaijan. And so that nervous energy sometimes can result in a knockout. Sometimes it results in, being a little bit more tentative, a little jumpy, and, maybe you're not executing the way that you usually do. I think that's anybody's guess, but taking also into account that Eric Nolan has never been knocked out before, that makes me think Hasanov by decision plus 325 is the better value method of victory wise. But another instance where at minus 177 money line, you're going to get a pretty good number for a method of victory double chance, knockout or decision. That's where I would end up going. For Eric Nolan, I honestly don't know what the best play would be. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that, maybe by knockout, just because he won 3 fights in a row by knockout in Cage Fury, including when he won his title over Blaine Richards. If I was going to go Eric Nolan, perhaps knockout. And especially if it, that becomes more likely if it does look like Hasanov is, letting the moment get to him. Gun to my head, I would say Eric Nolan by knockout if I had to choose a method of victory, but I don't love the methods of victory for him. There's a lot of information we don't have about him and Hasanov in this matchup, and I don't like any of his method of victory plays, and I don't love, betting him money line plus 152. Eric Nolan's kind of in no man's land for me. But I think you have some freedom with Hasanov to, play around, pick something that you think casts a wide net, and I think you get a decent number for it. Next up, we got Abus Magomedov versus Michel Pereira at middleweight. I had to go a little faster. Jesus Christ. I had to talk about a bunch of other shit before we got going with this. Michel Pereira is now the minus 113 favorite. Abus Magomedov, the minus 107 underdog. Michel Pereira is clearly taking money because he started the week as the underdog here. Let's talk about Abus Magomedov first. Talking about, things that are hard to predict. That is Abus Magomedov. Got knocked out by Sean Strickland, and his first 2 losses in the UFC were a knockout to Sean Strickland, where he did all right in the first round, and then looked like he was on the top of Mount Everest, the way that he was struggling to get air. Ends up getting finished by Strickland. Then he loses a decision to Calvarello. Those were his first 2 losses in the UFC. That's wild. Then he wins 3 in a row. Decision over Worley Alves, submission over Bruno Ferreira, and a unanimous decision win over Michel Pereira back in April of last year. The Pereira cherry on top of that 3-fight winning streak makes that a lot better than if it was, maybe someone else after Bruno Ferreira. But then he got submitted by Joe Pyfer at UFC 320 back in October. That was in round 2. Pyfer also got a knockdown up to that point. So it was not going Abus Magomedov's way. Abus Magomedov can, he can look really... Now, he never looks really good. He 30-27 Michel Pereira. It was like maybe closer than a unanimous 30-27 makes it sound. But there's a very hard line of opponents that Abus Magomedov is capable of beating and has the skill set to beat. If he can get them down, if they get more tired than him, he can hit decently hard if someone gives him an opening. There's a very hard line of an opponent that Abus Magomedov is capable of beating. It seems like there's a pretty hard line of the guys he's not capable of beating, and we haven't exactly found where that line falls yet. Somewhere, in between Joe Pyfer, Calvarello, Joe Pyfer, and somewhere in between Michel Pereira seems to be the line. Now, Michel Pereira, he is smaller than Abus Magomedov. Abus is a wiry dude. Looks like you could, if you got the, aerodynamics right, you could throw him a decent distance. Michel Pereira looked like he was going to be on his way out of the UFC. He had lost 4 of 5 fights from April of 2023 to August of 2024. Got submitted by Calvarello. Got submitted by Michel Pereira. Got submitted by Kevin Holland. It's not that bad. And then lost by unanimous decision to Shara Bullet, August of 2024. And that was 29-28, but 2 30-27s. Now, this guy used to be, mostly a knockout dude. The vast majority of his wins in the UFC have been by knockout. 2 of his last 3 wins are by knockout. He knocked out Cedricus Dumas. Knocked out Gerald Mearshart. And just back in February, he outstruck Marc-Andre Barriault, MAB 140-77, and wins 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. That's what it takes. MAB is always good to steal around. Maybe the sentiment of everybody leaning on Alexijuk, maybe that's wrong. Maybe there is a flaw to this thinking. Because, is Michel Alexijuk... I think that Michel Alexijuk, over his last 3 fights, regardless of the level of competition, regardless of any common opponents they've had, Michel Alexijuk looks like a new man over the last 3 fights since UFC 314. Looks a lot better. He looks like he has, he came out a better fighter because of, the high-quality opponents they have had him against. Or, plenty of them. Plenty, did he fight Dustin Jacoby at light heavyweight? My lord, what a mistake. He was fighting light heavyweight. He was losing to Jimmy Crute and OSP. Jesus. Alexijuk looks like a new man over the last 3 fights. And trusting that eye test, I think, is very important. And, I trust Alexijuk, too, if it ends up going the distance. I trust him to land with decent volume and good power at any point in the fight. And I think, I feel like Abus is going to be really dependent on getting Alexijuk down and finding a submission, but Kevin Holland was able to do it really fast, but that's not the way Abus works. And he only has the 1 win in the UFC. by submission was in round 3 against Ferreira by arm triangle, and a lot of that was just the result of Abus being like less tired than Ferreira, ended up in side control and gets the arm triangle. I think Abus is going to be really dependent on, getting a takedown and, trying to wear Alexajuk down before Abus gets worn down. Maybe he tries to, he certainly could land some harder shots of his own, but I think if he keeps trading with Michel Alexajuk, the more time that goes on, the more danger that Abus is in, and the better position that Michel Alexajuk is in. Choke, decision, knockout. I'm perfectly happy going Michel Alexajuk money line minus 113, especially because he was cheaper in DraftKings. I think I played him in every one of my lineups. I can show you here at the end, but I'm perfectly happy with taking him as a very slight favorite. I got him as an underdog to start the week. If I had to pick a method of victory, I probably would go by knockout. As the fight goes on, I think Alexajuk is going to keep pouring it on. I think there could be a moment where Abus Magomedov breaks if he realizes he is not going to be able to, body flop, the dude to the ground and get a submission. And if it's going to be too late to get to get the decision that way, I would go Alexajuk by knockout plus 195. By decision is plus 450. That's what I would pick second. There's just no, for Abus, I would say by submission is the one that makes the most sense. Alexajuk has been quite susceptible to submission losses. But with Abus, with decision being plus 575, you could do a method of victory double chance there, cast a wider net, which I think you kind of have to do with a guy as unpredictable as Abus Magomedov. But I love Michel Alexajuk in this spot. I think that the pace and the power combination that he has, how revitalized he has looked over these last 3 fights, my general wavering confidence level with Abus Magomedov looking like an EKG on a weekly basis when you think about him. I'm happy with Michel Alexajuk money line. I was thrilled to get him as an underdog. Next up, we got another middleweight matchup, this time between Ikram Aliskerov and the aforementioned Bruno Herrera. Ikram Aliskerov is the minus 275 favorite. Pereira, the plus 235 underdog. Ikram, 2 losses as a pro. He's 17-2, not young, even though he's pretty new to the UFC. He was born in 1992. In the UFC, counting the Contender Series, 5 wins, 4 finishes, 3 knockouts, 1 submission. All those finishes came in the first round over Mario Sousa on the Contender Series, then Phil Hawes, then Warley Alves, knocked out Andre Muniz April of last year, and then got a unanimous decision victory over Jung Young Park, the Iron Turtle, outstriking him 91-78 and getting 5 takedowns, controlling for 6 minutes. That is a wrinkle that you love to see in Ikram's game. You can only go on knocking people out in the first round so long because what we say, somehow he was the favorite against Robert Whittaker June of 2024, and he got a hole torn through him. He was not ready for that, and considering that he's not, he's not a spring chicken, he was probably never going to be ready for the Robert Whittaker fight. And they set him up as a favorite, and, really set him up for a fall, but got right back on the horse. Fought almost a year later against Muniz, but now he's on a 2-fight winning streak, and he's just beaten the 2 best fighters that he's ever faced and beaten in Muniz and Park. Bruno Ferreira on a pretty decent run himself. Pretty surprising because Ferreira's, for some reason, he's a guy that you think of and you think he, loses a lot, and not really. He knocked out RoboCop in his UFC debut, got knocked out by Nursultan Ruziboev, knocked out Phil Hawes and Dustin Stoltzfus, Hawes being a common opponent, got submitted by Abus Magomedov, as we said, at UFC 308. Then he went on this crazy 3-fight winning streak where he submitted Armin Petrosian, and I was super disappointed in Armin Petrosian for losing that one. Then he submits Jackson McVeigh, and McVeigh's been brought in a lot of these spots, and just ended up finally beating Cedricus Dumas back in April. Then he beats Marvin Vettori by unanimous decision at UFC 323. And look, Vettori's lost 4 in a row. His days of contending for the middleweight title are well behind him. But he's born in 1993. He's not ancient. That Marvin Vettori is the result of someone that, from June of 2021 to December of 2025, when he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 fights, where he only won 2 of those because he was fighting Izzy, Robert Whittaker, Jared Cannonier, a rematch with Roman Dolidze, in a fight that happened just in March of 2023, so that was strange. Lost a decision to Brendan Allen, and then lost a decision to Bruno Ferreira. Marvin Vettori is just kind of getting, worn down, but still a very impressive win for Ferreira to be able to go the distance with Vettori, play Vettori's game that just hasn't been going Vettori's way over the last few years. Vettori, always a guy that can land triple-digit strikes. It always looks close on paper, but Vettori did not pass the eye test over these last few fights, for sure. Okay, I'm on Vettori still. So, now, Ferreira, after that win, he has a rematch with RoboCop at UFC 326 this year and ends up getting knocked out. So that makes all 3 of his losses in the UFC finishes, 2 by knockout, 1 by submission. So, and Ikram Aliskerov is also a lot bigger than Ferreira. He will have a 4-inch reach advantage. He's around 2 inches taller. It's not crazy, but he is bigger. Ikram just passed 2 pretty big tests, but especially in Jung Young Park. That is not a guy that's easy to beat, and especially over the course of 3 rounds. I think no matter how this fight goes, the only thing you have to do if you're Ikram is not get hit with a big Bruno Ferreira bomb. Do not get hit with, but then he did have those couple of arm bars, but I think that's going to be tough to pull off on Ikram Aliskerov too. I don't know how his other professional loss happened off the top of my head, though. And I know it's late, but damn it, I have to know. Both of his losses are by knockout, concerningly. But wait. The only other loss that Ikram Aliskerov has as a professional was in Brave CF, April of 2019, against a 4-0 fighter named Hamzat Chimaev. So the only 2 people that have ever beaten Ikram Aliskerov, they did it by knockout, but it was Hamzat and it was Robert Whittaker. I think Ikram is just a tier or 2 above Bruno Ferreira. Certainly Ferreira is capable of landing a knockout. I did not think that Ferreira would be capable of that 3-fight winning streak he was on. But Ikram moved past, obviously the holes that were exposed when he fought Robert Whittaker. And not only got back to finishing people like Andre Muniz, but was able to go 3 rounds and, land a bunch of strikes, get takedowns against Jung Young Park. Ikram Aliskerov has more ways to win this fight. I think he has more ways to win this fight inside the distance, too. Ikram has 5 submissions to his 7 knockouts, too. So, Ikram's a big favorite. Minus 275, not crazy. What were the scorecards? 30-27 all around against Jung Young Park. I think if it goes the distance, I think it's likely that it's going really well in Ikram's favor. So, you could do a point spread here. I don't think you're going to get a good number on it. Yeah, minus 200 to cover the spread for Ikram. Ikram to win the fight inside the distance is minus 160. That's actually not that bad. I thought it was going to be in the 200s, but I would think about Ikram Aliskerov minus 160 inside the distance. That's not that bad. For the fight to end inside the distance at all, it's minus 400. Not too surprising. But Ikram by knockout, probably the single most likely method of victory. That's plus 120. But then they have Ikram by decision at plus 450. By submission is also plus 450. I would prefer by submission plus 450 rather than by decision. So you end up liking being able to cast the wider net for inside the distance minus 160. That's where I would go with that. I like Ikram in DFS too. When that guy wins, he puts up triple-digit performances. That's what you're looking for if you're going to be spending, in the 9,000s or whatever on DraftKings. So, yeah, hit it. And, Bruno Ferreira, if you don't land that big shot, if you don't find a way to slide in that arm bar.
Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
Next up. Jesus Christ. I did this to myself. Flyweight. Love this fight. Can't believe it hasn't happened yet. Swear I had a dream about it one time. Asu Amabayev against Charles Johnson. Oh my God. No, luckily for Asu Amabayev, he is not a really young prospect that everybody expects to go undefeated. Because that is who Charles Johnson does his best work against. Hard to get a read on Charles Johnson, too. Asu Amabayev is the minus 250 favorite. Chucky, the plus 210 underdog. Well, let's talk about Asu Amabayev first. 23-3 as a professional. He is not young. Born in 1994. Right now, he's 32. Asu Amabayev came into the UFC on a 4-fight winning streak after he had been, I think, either the Octagon or the NYSA champion. Brave CF. He was fighting a lot in Brave CF. And NYSA. He was a NYSA champion back in 2020. He was actually a champion. He was the M1 interim flyweight champion. Wow. Kind of dates him. But he's only ever been in like quality promotions before he came to the UFC. And so he comes in on a 4-fight winning streak in the UFC. Submits Ode Osborne. Then beats CJ Vergara. Jose Johnson. By decision. Then beats Matheus Nicolau by decision. Okay. There we go. Nicolau, Ode Osborne. That's that's 2 of your first 4 wins in the UFC, and you hadn't taken a loss up to that point. Very well done. Then he fights Starboy March of last year. It seems like forever ago for, what's happened for Starboy since then. But that was the main event of that fight night. I remember being on Asu Amabayev going into that fight because I was just remembering Starboy's fight with Makayev and thinking if you're in... We've seen Starboy be trigger shy early in his UFC career when the threat of that kind of takedown volume wasn't there. So I figured Starboy was going to be reluctant to really get into his striking flow state because he's worried about Asu Amabayev's takedowns. It was not a concern. If you recall, Starboy did really well defending Makayev's takedowns too, which was what made it so frustrating that he wasn't letting his hands go. Asu Amabayev went 0 for 6 on takedown attempts. In that fight, I think he maybe got poked in the eye a couple of times or hitting the ball. I remember there was a couple of fouls that probably wouldn't have made a difference, but they were in the finishing sequence. But Asu Amabayev was getting outclassed by Starboy in that fight and wasn't able to get his takedowns. That's going to be a problem if you're asking Asu Amabayev to box and kickbox with Starboy, and that's why it ended up getting stopped in the 3rd round as the barrage came on. He recovers, wins a unanimous decision over Jose Ochoa, July of 2025, and then, very importantly, ends up getting the 3rd round guillotine over Alex Perez last November in a fight that, if I recall, he was not winning in the 3rd round. And if you had Alex Perez, it was a heartbreaker. He was close to being able to, I think, end up getting that decision and falls into a guillotine that Asu snaps up. And so now he is 6-1 in the UFC with his only loss being to the probable #1 contender at flyweight. So it's weird. After the Starboy fight, you think about Asaul Mabayev like, oh my god, like why do we, talk about that guy? Why are we excited about? Dude, he's 23-3, beating Alex Perez and Nicolau. No doubt, I want to see how he does against Charles Johnson, but I want to see how he does against people in between Perez and Starboy. I don't know if Perez is ranked as a flyweight anymore, but that number probably wasn't accurate, considering his timeline. So yeah, I think everybody was a little hard on Asaul Mabayev, but what he's done in the UFC has been quite impressive. Now, Charles Johnson will have a 5-inch reach advantage. He is 5 inches taller. He is 3 years older. Charles Johnson is 2-2 in his last 4 fights. Charles Johnson is a cockroach to fly with, especially ones that are rising, that are on their way up. And so Charles Johnson had those wins over Isaac Maxim, over Jake Hadley, gets that upset knockout over Joshua Van, then beats Sumata Harry by decision. That was his 4-fight winning streak. He was the talk of the town. Then he loses by unanimous decision to Ramazan Timarov. Timarov hasn't fought since then, but he's fighting Steve Ursig in July at the Ankalaev versus Roundtree fight night. My God. Then Charles Johnson does what he does, catches young Loner Kavanaugh by surprise August of last year, knocks him out in round 2. And what does Loner Kavanaugh go on to do afterward? Beats Brandon Moreno handily in a fight night main event. And now Loner Kavanaugh is, working his way up the flyweight ladder and is probably, going to continue to do so. It's like that movie with Dane Cook, I believe called Good Luck Chuck, where every time Dane Cook had sex with a woman, the next person that the next dude that she met or dated would be the person that she married. And so people were coming to Dane Cook, having sex with him so that they could find their husband later. Imagine telling that story to your husband once you're married. But that's what it is. You got to go get knocked out by Charles Johnson. You got to pay the piper if you want to make your way up the flyweight ladder. Then he gets knocked out by Alex Perez. In pretty devastating fashion. He got kind of fucked up by Alex Perez at UFC 324. 39-8 straight, and got knocked down twice before the fight was finished. Bounces back March of this year, gets a split decision victory over Bruno Silva. Poor Bruno Silva, man. After fighting Starboy and Joshua Van in a fucking row, beating Hyun-Sung Park, and then he lost a split decision to Charles Johnson. Edgar Chairez, who is this guy? Who is Edgar Chairez? Bruno Silva, this is well within your ante, ends up getting submitted. Poor Bruno Silva, man. I like that guy. I wish he was still hanging around the flyweight rankings. So, what do you do with Charles Johnson here? I think this is the spot where you do not believe in the Charles Johnson magic. The thing about Bruno Silva is, while he does have some, submission acumen for sure, he's not like a wrestler or anything. He's that has not been a part of his game of late. He went for it against Hyun-Sung Park, but a lot of the time Bruno Silva is just mixing hands. And he's good at that against a lot of people. Finding the foot and getting a lot of, knockdowns against people. And, that is not a great matchup as a smaller fighter against Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson is lengthy. He is very good with his hands, too. He has power in those, too. He can throw volume, too. And, so that was a bad matchup for Bruno Silva. Alex Perez, a little bit more of a wild card, and kept Charles Johnson guessing for the brief amount of time that fight lasted. Charles Johnson was 0-6 on takedown attempts. Bruno Silva was 0-8 on his takedown attempts in their fight. I think Asil Mabayev will be able to get Charles Johnson down. Maybe 2 times, maybe 6 or 7 times. But I think the most important thing here is that Asil Mabayev's objective is a little clearer. He's not going to be guessing as to what Charles Johnson's going to do. Charles Johnson's going to try to put his hands on him. But Charles Johnson will have to guess about what Asil Mabayev's going to do. He's going to have to be careful about submission attempts, where he puts his head in his neck at any given point if they're tied up. He is going to have to, while he's obviously going to have to be mindful of if Asil Mabayev is throwing a punch at him, but all that time he's going to be wondering when the next takedown attempt's coming. That is where the concern is with this matchup for Charles Johnson. Same thing with Joshua Van. Charles Johnson knew that Joshua Van was going to be coming at him and throwing a bunch of strikes at him. And so Charles Johnson settled into his comfort zone. And then, like, Isaac Maxim, I think when we reached on that point, because they each had 2 takedowns now, Cody Durden got Charles Johnson down 11 times. Keep that in. Ode Osborne got him down 3 times. Muhammad Makayev got him down 12 times. So I think Asil Mabayev will be able to take Charles Johnson down. And, it's Charles Johnson having to guess about exactly what's coming next, and Asil Mabayev not having to, that I think is the difference maker here. Has Charles Johnson ever been submitted in the UFC? No, he has not. Not by Makayev, not by Durden, but not by Rafael Fiziev. Even though there was a big striking differential there, and Estevam got the 3 takedowns. So Charles Johnson's never been submitted in the UFC. And that was opportunistic for Asil Mabayev against Alex Perez. The common opponent doesn't mean as much to me. Alex Perez is a question mark, is a wild card too. But I think here, he did submit Ode Osborne too. But Charles Johnson, I think is going to be tougher to, historically, he is difficult to submit in all his fights in the UFC. That guy can get up when he's down too. That's why people have had to take him down 6, 10, 11, 12 times, because he can get up. And so I think that'll put him in some dangerous spots, but it'll also disrupt submission attacks from Asil Mabayev. I'm going Asil Mabayev by decision, plus 100. Hit it. I see where you're coming from. If you want Charles Johnson moneyline plus 210, if you're going Charles Johnson moneyline's fine plus 210, but Charles Johnson by knockout is plus 700. If I was feeling strongly on Charles Johnson's direction, I would go there, because if the takedowns aren't happening, and Asil Mabayev, like it kind of happened with Starboy, if Asil Mabayev is forced to just sit there and strike with Charles Johnson, now Charles Johnson is as free as a bird, and then the knockout is going to be quite available. So plus 700 for Charles Johnson by knockout, I do think is a good value. But my favorite play here is Asil Mabayev by decision, plus 100. I'm not using, if I was going to use one of these guys in DFS, I would use Charles Johnson, though. Asu, for the price that he is, I think that what he might end up scoring in a given fight is a very wide range. Charles Johnson's going to be cheap, and he has a high ceiling for his scoring, and, even in a win, probably a pretty, decent floor. All right, next up. 3 fights left. Hold on. 3 fights left. We got a lightweight matchup between Nazim Sadikov and Matheus Camilo. Interesting matchup. Camilo 10-3 as a professional, 25 years old. 4 wins by knockout, 2 by submission, 4 wins by decision. All 3 losses in his career have come by submission. This guy's all over the place. As a pro, some fights in Shootout Brazil, some fights in Fury FC. Beat some fighters with some, decent records there. That was a few years ago at this point. A good fight and tough enough. Won by decision there against Janoski Sojo. October 2024. Sojo is 13-5. Then he goes to Zombie Fight Night. Beats Dorobshuk Nabatov by decision, who was 8-0 at the time. Then gets called up to the UFC and gets submitted in round 2 by Gabe Green, who's 12-5. Gabe Green at the time had not won a fight since April of 2022, and he had taken losses to Ian Gary and Brian Battle in the meantime. Yeah, that caught me by surprise too. Gabe Green was the plus 190 underdog. It just seemed like Gabe Green was kind of supposed to be a sacrificial lamb to a guy like Camilo. It was young and on the rise, and Gabe Green had different plans. Lesson be learned, Mateus Camilo. But 3-1 in Fury, and then bounces back November of 2025 with a unanimous decision win over Vyacheslav Borshev, Slava Claus. Got outstruck 65-39, but Camilo got 5 takedowns, controlled for 3 minutes, 22 seconds, and it ended up being 29-28 on one scorecard, 30-27 on the other two in favor of Camilo, which you wouldn't have necessarily guessed on paper. But we've seen some limitations here of Camilo at this point as a 25-year-old, and it got submitted by Gabe Green. He's been submitted 3 times in his 13 pro fights, and then, had to give up some in the striking department to exert his, advantages against Slava Claus. Nazim Saidakov, 11-2-1 as a professional, born in 1994. These two are pretty much the same exact size, and it's just been a difference in the quality of competition that they've faced, and at the UFC level. Saidakov won on the Contender Series with a first-round knockout, won by third-round knockout, then won by third-round knockout in his UFC debut against Evan Elder, then gets a second-round rear-naked choke against Terrence T-Rex McKinney, survives the first round against Terrence T-Rex McKinney, almost as impressive as submitting him in the second round, fights to a draw with Slava Claus at UFC 295. Majority draw. Got outstruck 143-91. Got a knockdown and 4 takedowns, though. So that was kind of a surprising majority decision. I don't think that is that much different even than like what Slava Claus and Camilo did with one another. So I don't look at that and say, oh, a common opponent. Look at what happened there. Look at that. No, I think that's quite acceptable. Slava Claus throws a lot, and if you're able to hit him back and do damage with, comparable volume, and you're able to get it into the area of grappling where Slava Claus is not comfortable, that's what you're supposed to do. Saidakov then knocks out Ismail Bonfim February of last year in the first round, then knocks out Nicolas Mata in the second round after being in some real danger against Nicolas Mata. He got knocked down in that fight last June. What I love about Saidakov is still hasn't won by decision in the UFC, but he's had knockouts and finishes in every round. I always love to see that from people. And he's coming off of a loss against Farah Zaim by second round knockout at UFC 323. The fight did not go well for him in December. And that was at the tail end of Farah Zaim's 6-fight winning streak that just got ended by Tom Nolan just a few weeks ago. I do think this just got like where my trust is going is in Nazim Saidakov, who I trust in every round. He's a submission threat. He's I think the fight with Slava Claus shows that he's very capable of winning by decision. This is one guy that I think the Azerbaijan crowd will be very excited to see. He's not like a huge submission threat, but it is possible, especially against a guy like Camilo, who has been so vulnerable to that. Saidakov's minus 220, Camilo's plus 185. I would I would say like Camilo won by decision against Slava Claus. Historically, Nazim Sadykhov has won a lot inside the distance. Sadykhov by knockout is plus 160. Sadykhov by submission is plus 550. By decision is plus 250. If I'm taking Camilo, I'm saying Camilo by decision. That's plus 600. And that's an excellent number to get Camilo by decision. Sadykhov to win inside the distance is minus 125. I'm perfectly fine with that. Cover the bases. Sadykhov is good at knocking people out. Round 1, 2, or 3. Has sprinkled in a submission every now and then in his career. And Camilo, against people that, can submit you even a little bit, that's been the Achilles heel of his professional career. Camilo's getting, he's 25 years old. So, and Nazim Sadykhov being 32 and having this much UFC experience, it's a dangerous fight, but it's one where I think Nazim Sadykhov has all of these, like, little advantages that sometimes go one way or the other. So, and I think it's going to be a lot for Camilo to fight Nazim Sadykhov in Azerbaijan. The pressure may be there for Sadykhov to get a win against a guy on his way up in front of his, in his home country. But I think there's going to be some heat for Camilo, going into enemy territory and taking on a guy who, has a good UFC record and, has wins over guys like T-Rex and Ismail Bonfim. So that's where I go. Sadykhov probably inside the distance. Spreading a little wide net and getting minus 125. I'm not disappointed at all. Camilo, I would not want to take just money line at plus 185. If I was going Camilo, I would actually go buy decision plus 600. I think that's the best value for his method of victory plays. That's where I'm going with that one. We're almost done. We're on 2.5 hours. How's that possible? Well, at least I'm getting it done on Wednesday, man. And I just did 2 hours of a UFL 2026 recap last night. Go check that out, by the way. If you're also into spring football, go check out the 2 hours I talked about the 2026 UFL season. We're to the co-main event of the evening. It is a middleweight matchup between Shara Bullet and Michel Pereira. Shara Bullet, the minus 400 favorite. Pereira, the plus 300 underdog. There was a little moment there where Pereira was a ranked fighter, and then he fought Anthony Hernandez. I cannot believe that was considered a closely contested fight before it happened, but hindsight's 2020. Because this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fight winning streak that Pereira racked up was fool's gold, when the best wins were like Chaos, Nico Price, Santiago Ponzinibbio, Andre Petrosky, Mikel Alexijuk before he was the guy that we've seen recently, and Ihor Potieria. That is a lot of low middle to maybe middle range of the middleweight division. And now he's lost 3 of his last 4 fights, got knocked out by Anthony Hernandez, lost a unanimous decision of Abus Magomedov, and then got knocked out by Kyle Dawkins in Kyle Dawkins' return party. He did just beat Zach Reese by split decision back in February. He got outstruck 74-63. He got 2 takedowns to Reese's 1. Zach Reese is incredibly hard to get a read on too. And like, if I had to make a call on Zach Reese, I'd say like I fade him, at the opportunities I get, even though they keep serving him winnable fights. Because the wins are against Julian Marquez, Jose Daniel Medina, Dusko Todorovic, and Jackson McVeigh. That's 2 Contender Series fights. Dusko and then Julian Marquez, who, has long been beyond his best days. I don't know what to think of Zach Reese because he's not young either. Shara Bullet, on the other hand, he's 16-1 as a pro. Decision win over Bruno Silva. Knocked out Antonio Tricoli. Decision win over Mikel Alexiou. Knocked out Armin Petrosian with a spinning back fist when spinning back fists were all the rage. Coming off of a win over Marc-Andre Barrios last July, outstriking him 93-39, got taken down a couple times, still won 30-27 on all 3 judges' scorecard. The only blemish on his professional record is Michael Venom Page, who did MVP stuff to Shara Bullet. It was Shara Bullet matchup kryptonite. And Shara was never able to, use his talents in the stand-up because Michael Venom Page is just more, skilled, craftier, more deceiving, way harder to time and guess. And, you know what MVP is. You get it. So that's what went wrong in that one. That was always going to be a rough matchup. MVP is a rough matchup for a lot of people, but against a striker like Shara Magomedov, that was going to be a really tough test. And even though Shara is now 32, that was his first loss, and it seems like it was a good learning experience. I do not think that Michel Pereira has anything to offer Shara Bullet that others didn't also have and failed to do what they needed to do with it. The highest hope you would have is that maybe you catch Shara Bullet by submission, but no one's done that all through his professional career. He is Russian. They kind of come out of the womb knowing how to defend at least a few basic submissions. I just don't know what Pereira's game plan is going to be. And if I'm wondering that, I'm wondering what we're going to see from Pereira, because he's had some fights where it's what in God's name is your strategy here? What was the game plan? What'd you guys talk about for months coming into this fight? Pereira does a lot of pretty stuff and cool stuff. It's neat stuff for, video clips and whatnot. I'm sure he's a hell of a dancer, but the Santiago Ponzinibbio's, Petrosky's, the Nikos, the Chaoses, Mikel Alexiou, before Mikel Alexiou, evolved into Charmeleon or whatever. That's what Pereira's capable of. Zach Reese is one where he's going to get, a little bit of more credit behind him than I think he's due, because I don't think Zach Reese deserves a lot of credit behind him. Kyle Dawkins knocked you out. Anthony Hernandez tore a hole through you in that Fight Night main event. Abus Magomedov outstruck you, and you didn't get anything going in the grappling department or use anything crafty to combat that. That was another one where it's what in God's name is your strategy, Michel Pereira? So, for those reasons, Shara's minus 400. Shara by decision is plus 130. Actually, 1, 2, 3 of his 5 UFC wins have been by decision. He didn't knock out MAB. Knockouts on the table, especially if Pereira, resorts to some goofy shit. Knockout is on the table. So by decision, plus 130. And then by knockout is plus 135. I think honestly, if you go Shara Bullet because I think it's a coin flip between knockout or decision, and more of that might be up to Pereira and how he approaches the fight than anything that Bullet does, unless he lands another spinning back fist. But if you take a method of victory double chance for Bullet to win by knockout or by decision, whatever number it is at, I think you've pretty much covered all of the bases of what can reasonably happen in this fight. I'm not envisioning a path to victory for Michel Pereira. I don't see how he wins this one. Unless it's just something wild in that nobody in the world is expecting, including Bullet. So yeah, if you take to win by decision or by knockout, I think you've covered pretty much 999 of the scenarios of this fight out of 1,000. Yeah, double chance by knockout or by decision is minus 325. Okay, pair that with something. If I absolutely have to pick one, if I absolutely have to pick a method of victory for Shara, I'm probably saying by decision plus 130. Because, like, Pereira is a unique body type for even this weight class. He is unorthodox. I think it'll keep Shara guessing just a little bit. You know, I think he can keep Shara at a decent enough distance and maybe avoid getting put away. So I think decision is just a millimeter more likely than the knockout. That's how it's handicapped. Bullet by decision. Bullet method of victory double chance. Hell, with Shara to cover 3.5. Minus 200. That's pretty good too. I would think about that. But I am drawing a blank when I try to think about how Michel Pereira wins this fight. And finally, God damn it, finally we're to the main event of the evening.
I want to tell me what you see. Let's go ahead and see by the fight what you saw in the ring.
We have a lightweight main event between Azerbaijan's own Rafael Fiziev and Manuel Torres. Fiziev is the very slight favorite, minus 111, to Torres, the very slight underdog, minus 109. This is the one I thought the most about this week. Manuel Torres, 17-3. Every win in the UFC has been a finish. All but one have been by knockout. And every finish, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, has been in the first round. That makes 5 first-round knockouts over the likes of Nicholas Mata. He submitted Chris Duncan, knocked out Drew Dober, knocked out Grant Dawson. He got knocked out in the first round and got absolutely torn to shreds by Ignacio Bahamondes a couple of years ago at UFC 306, UFC Noche. Manuel Torres is not, like, young anymore. Almost exactly 2 years older than me, 31. Manuel Torres is definitely a sniper. There's a reason he keeps finishing, knocking people out in the first round. And the Bahamondes fight wasn't a good look. Bahamondes matched and exceeded Torres in all the areas where Torres typically has an advantage. And he's back on a winning track with his 2-fight winning streak, knocking out Dober and Dawson. But I'm having trouble of what to make of that. Drew Dober had lost 3 in a row to that point to Renato Moicano, Gene Silva, and Manuel Torres. He'd been knocked out by Matt Frivola at UFC 288. Now he's won 2 fights in a row by knockout, of freaking course. But I don't know what to make of a Drew Dober win when Drew Dober is, approaching 40 years old. And with Grant Dawson, I still don't know what I even think about Grant Dawson. When you look at the guys that he's beaten and the guys he's coming up short against. Mark Madsen, Demiris Magalov, he beat them. Joe Selecki, Rafa Garcia, Diego Ferreira, Matus Rebecki. Out of all those fights, the biggest win that he has is Matus Rebecki. The last time out, he won by rear naked choke. All the hype was around Grant Dawson as like a future lightweight title contender. And then he fought Bobby Green in a Fight Night main event.
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
And got slept very early. All right, so the two best people that Grant Dawson has ever fought, he got knocked out in very short order. So I don't know what to make of Manuel Torres' last two wins either. Because Rafael Fiziev does not fight like that. Fiziev, only a couple years older. 13-5 as a pro. Really didn't, could be fooled from 2 fights with Justin Gaethje and the way he got finished by Mauricio Houfi. But it's not like Fiziev is one of these guys that's been around for 40 fights in the UFC or anything. So Fiziev has a unanimous decision win over Bobby Green, knocked out Brad Riddell, knocked out Rafael dos Anjos, and then the only win that he has since RDA, July 2022, he's lost 4 of his last 5 fights. But, important caveat to a lot of that. So, he loses to Justin Gaethje by majority decision. March of 2023 at UFC 286, a fight that a lot of people thought he was the rightful winner of. I thought that he beat Justin Gaethje in that fight. Next, he fights Mateusz Gamrot and gets injured and ends up losing by TKO as a result of it. So I don't, that doesn't really mean anything for what we're talking about right now. Fights Justin Gaethje again at UFC 313, almost exactly 2 years later from their first fight. This was another extremely close fight that Justin Gaethje won 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. So on 2 occasions, Fiziev, I think, should have beaten Justin Gaethje and then had a very close fight with Justin Gaethje. And Justin Gaethje, I don't know if you heard, he just became a 37-year-old UFC lightweight champion in finishing Ilia Topuria. So that's meaningful. And then his only win since RDA is a unanimous decision victory over Ignacio Bahamondes. And, he outstruck him 62-50. He took Bahamondes down 4 times, didn't control for much of it, but landed 4 of 4 takedown attempts, won 30-27 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Crazy when you watch it. It didn't feel like that, big of a deficit, but he won every round. And Bahamondes, like I said, he matches or exceeds, I believe, what Manuel Torres offers in his areas of strength. Now Bahamondes had that loss to Tafik Mazaev I mentioned earlier. There's some questions about that too, but Ignacio Bahamondes is, very much a killer. And technically has a worse record in the UFC than Manuel Torres. But you saw what happened when Bahamondes fought Manuel Torres. Manuel Torres wasn't patient. He's worked on his patience, against the likes of Drew Dober and Grant Dawson. It's very different with Rafael Fiziev. The thing that, so common opponent part aside, the eye test of how Fiziev fought against Ignacio Bahamondes was encouraging to me because, after those 3 losses in a row, you wonder, Bahamondes is, on a tear. Is this a bad time for Fiziev to be fighting him? And he handled it with grace and won over the course of 3 rounds in a closely contested fight. Ignacio Bahamondes, who is, taller at 6'3" with a 75-inch reach and was, 4 years younger than Rafael Fiziev. And Manuel Torres has some of those advantages just at a lesser capacity than Bahamondes does. I think if, Fiziev decides that he wants to get a few takedowns, I think he can do that against Manuel Torres. With his center of gravity and whatnot, it hasn't been the easiest. Like, pretty much nobody's really taken Manuel Torres down. He hasn't given too many people the chance, and Grant Dawson's the one that you'd think would, have attempted that, and he was asleep before he could say shoot. So I like the well-roundedness of Rafael Fiziev in this matchup. If I thought Manuel Torres was going to have a ridiculous speed advantage here, I would change my tune, but I don't think it'll be a ridiculous speed advantage. He'll have a length advantage, and I think Rafael Fiziev is probably going to catch, a few punches that, remind him that he's in a competitive fight. But I don't know if Torres will be able to, one-shot finish Fiziev like he's been able to do to so many people of a lesser caliber. I think Torres will probably land some really good shots, but I think Fiziev will probably land, 2 to 4 good shots to every one of Torres's, and those are going to add up. And I think what we probably end up seeing is not a knockout for Fiziev, but this is going to be a 5-round matchup where obviously Rafael Fiziev has does he? Oh my God. Okay, he went 5 rounds when he fought RDA. He finished him in the 5th round. But he's trained for 5-round fights. That's important too. You shared the cage with Justin Gaethje twice over the course of, you fought 30 minutes in a cage with Justin Gaethje, didn't get finished, and arguably won the first fight. Now, he did get finished by Mauricio Hoofy. And post BSD, now Hoofy looks like he's on a tear up the lightweight rung, and it seems like, nothing might stop him, on the way to the top unless, there's somebody, obviously with like the ability to do a BSD dip. But Mauricio Hoofy is so dangerous on the feet. And it's a different kind of power that I don't think Manuel Torres has. Manuel Torres has great power with his counter shots when he's sniping at a distance and, he times you right. But Mauricio Hoofy will just like throw a kick that you'll block and you'll end up rocked in on skates. It's a different level of power, and we saw that on display against Fiziev. We saw it just a few weeks ago very much on display against Michael Chandler. So I don't think the Hoofy loss for Fiziev is an indication that like he's done and, that he's just going to start getting, slept by people. That he's got to be careful. But Rafael Fiziev with the consistent production in the stand-up that he has always offered, whether it is a knockout or decision, I think he's the more well-rounded fighter. I think he's better equipped to win this fight the deeper that it goes. Like Manuel Torres is going to have to, reach into the repertoire if this goes past round 1. If you don't finish him in round 1, every one of your fights in the UFC has ended in the first round. And now you're fighting Rafael Fiziev in Azerbaijan. So, for all of those reasons, always going back and forth in these main events, and do you go with the established guy that has fought everybody and, has these wins and this loss, but that loss? Or do you go with the guy that's like more on his way up, and Manuel Torres, who's not that much younger, but, look at how many people he's been finishing. Fiziev just got knocked out. In that constant back and forth battle we do like almost every week, give me Rafael Fiziev as the very slight favorite, minus 111. Hit it. And the most likely method of victory is Manuel Torres by knockout plus 125. Then it's Fiziev by knockout plus 140. Fiziev by decision is plus 550. That is more against Manuel Torres being able to make it 5 rounds when he's never entered round 2. So I get that. But I think, like, we have a point spread. How do we not have a point spread on the main event? Okay. Well, double chance for Fiziev by TKO, by knockout or decision. What? Method of victory double chance. Rafael Fiziev by knockout or by decision is plus 100. Hit it. Yes, absolutely. That covers a very large percentage of the basis of the ways that this fight could end. Manuel Torres, if he wins this fight, I think you have to think that it happens by knockout. I would be absolutely dumbfounded if over the course of 5 rounds, he was able to consistently win in the stand-up against Fiziev and was able to consistently fend off to Fiziev's, more well-rounded MMA game. Now, maybe if Fiziev gets injured again. God, I hope not. That would put a lot of plans in the kibosh, but I don't understand a lot of the method of victory and the prop, numbers here. I think Fiziev by knockout or decision plus 100 is a slam dunk. I love him money line, in a fight that's practically pick'em, but getting plus 100 for pretty much every way that Fiziev could win when I think Fiziev is rightfully favored seems like an excellent bargain to me. Oh my Jesus. Folks, that is all 13 fights for UFC Baku in Azerbaijan going down at 9 a.m. Eastern Time this Saturday. Follow me on Instagram at RotoBrady MMA. Like and subscribe the podcast and check out all my YouTube shorts and everything else I'm putting out on YouTube at Tap That MMA Podcast. Trying to do, as much as I possibly can to, expand the content that I'm putting out. So keep an eye out for it. Getting my act together and, trying to pump out those things that I've let go by the wayside since I've had to transition to a, kind of a different way of putting stuff out. And now real quick, I'll just show you all my, the bets I placed and my DFS lineups. Real quick, let me share this screen as we're about to hit 3 goddamn hours. All right. So, Joe Swagger, there's a parlay. I hate when it does that, but see where I got these. Michel Pereira plus 110. Did you see that? Fiziev minus 112 is where I got him. And then here are my DFS lineups. I did one with Torres, one with Fiziev, and one without either of them because this one was a hard one to budget for, considering how I feel about a good amount of these underdogs. So Fiziev, Alexijuk, Shara Bullet, had to go Charles Johnson there. For Sultan and Javier Reyes, Manuel Torres, Boxhead Almacan, Nursultan, Alexijuk, Nazim Sadikov, Javier Reyes, and then the one without either guy in the main event, Rizboev, Yakayev, Almacan, Charles Johnson, Mikel Alexijuk, and Javier Reyes. Folks, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Tap That MMA podcast. I got, rescheduling interlude episodes, getting more on the calendar. Go check out, the recent ones I've done. Go check out my, UFL 2026 recap and Tap That postseason awards if that's something that you're interested in. And be on the lookout on Instagram and on YouTube for me to put out more content relating to the other combat sports action we have this week. Folks, thank you so much for listening. Have yourselves a great week. Enjoy these fights and peace.